Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight in 7 Scariest True Stories from Old Cemeteries, we walk beneath crooked tombstones and faded names, through graveyards where the rain never seems to stop, and the air tastes of rust and memory. These are chilling tales whispered by the dead, of bells that toll with no wind, lanterns that flicker without flame, and footsteps pacing between the graves long after the gates are locked. You're hearing this with the sound of rain, because every drop that hits the ground might be a heartbeat echoing from beneath. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now and help this darkness grow. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's an old cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name, because some places remember their visitors. Even after they're gone, kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I never meant to walk through a cemetery at midnight in Tokyo. I'm the kind of person who takes long routes to avoid even small shrines after dark. Not out of superstition, but because I don't want to be the guy who trips into a stone lantern and has to explain it to an insurance company. But this happened to me last summer, and even writing about it makes the air feel a degree colder around my shoulders. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put it somewhere that isn't my head. I work late shifts at a small post-production studio near Shinakubo. On good nights, I catch the last Yamanote line and zone out to the soft mechanical announcements and the sway of tired people pretending not to lean on each other. On the night this started, we were wrapping a rush job and I watched the last train time flip to Zhongdian, just as my boss Okada shouted for one more export. My coworker Aya gave me a look that said, "You should go, but I'm not good at leaving people stranded with work." By the time the render finished, the metal shutters were already groaning down on the little ramen shop next door, and the street had that emptied-out feeling. Trash bags aligned like chess pieces, the bright rectangles of convenience stores floating on their own light. I missed the train by 11 minutes. I checked my phone and saw a message from my younger sister, Mina. "Are you on the way?" Mom asked. Mom always worries, even now that we're adults. I typed taxi and added a thumbs-up emoji. The problem is taxis are weirdly scarce on some side streets that late, and the few that drifted by already had red Renzu lights glowing. I could have waited near the main road, but a friend once told me there's a shortcut from Napori if you cut past the older cemetery, a straight line back toward my little apartment in Uguisudani. "It slices off like 20 minutes, he said. "It's quiet but safe. Tokyo quiet, not countryside quiet." I'd walked near Yanaka Cemetery in the day when cats patrol the stone edges like supervisors and old men smoke patiently under trees that remember everyone. At night it's a different kind of silence. The trees hold their breath. The lights don't cover as much ground as you'd expect, but I was tired and a little cocky about city safety. And there was the stupid 20 minutes to be saved and my phone battery hovered at 14%. I picked a line on the map, nodded like this was a normal choice, and stepped past the low fence. It didn't feel wrong. The air was still and warm and sticky, and the only sound was the soft electric hum of a vending machine at the path entrance. The stones stood mostly knee-high with a few taller monuments like dark sails. I kept my eyes forward and remembered to move without swagger, the way you do when you want to be invisible to any trouble that might occur. If I stopped walking, the silence felt like it would spill over the path. When I moved, it settled again behind me. I'd gone maybe 100 meters when I noticed the paper cranes. They were clustered on a low grave by the path, dozens of them, all small and pale against the gray stone. The grave itself was simple, no photographs, just an inscription softened by rain and time. The cranes were too neatly arranged to be random. Someone had placed them carefully, 3 to a line, all facing the same direction. The little wings were crisp as clean shirts. I slowed to look. It didn't feel disrespectful to stop. It felt rude to pass without noticing. The characters on the stone were clear enough to make out names and a date from the early 2000s. There was a small ceramic cup with a tiny toy car inside. I thought of a child who loved cars, a mother who came in the daytime when it was safe to cry. A wind picked up where there hadn't been wind a moment before. Not a breeze, a movement like an exhale. The trees didn't stir. The smoke trail from a stick of incense still glowed straight like a string. Only the paper cranes rustled. Their heads ticked, their wings lifted slightly, and one by one they unfolded. At first I thought I was seeing it wrong. Paper doesn't unfold itself without fingers, but the tiny creases eased open as if the paper were relaxing, and each crane fell back to the path like a flower closing at night. It wasn't chaotic. It was almost polite. I crouched, about to reach out, then pulled my hand back because touching anything felt like a line I shouldn't cross. The paper lay flat in the dim light, squares with ghostly grid marks where folds used to be. I leaned closer and saw charcoal rubbings on each a square, shaded rectangles, letters, pieces of names. Not the name on this grave. Not Japanese names either. A handful I couldn't place. One looked Western. One looked like a Korean family name. One had a first name I recognized, Alakon, but no last name I could make out. It was too specific to be decoration, and too strange to be a prank left for midnight passers-by. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. The shutter sound was offensively loud in the quiet. I muted it and took another. My battery had dipped to 12%. I didn't want to use my flashlight. Something about shining bright light felt like grabbing someone's shoulder in the dark. I stood, murmured sumimasen, and kept walking. Half a minute later, I heard humming. Nothing dramatic. A tune under breath, the kind of sound you make when you're trying to soothe a baby or remember a half-forgotten song from your own childhood. It came from behind me at first. I turned and saw only stones and the thin path and the crisp line of lights along the lane. It wasn't echoing off anything obvious. It wasn't the wind. It sounded human, and it sounded close enough that I should have seen the person doing it. I didn't run. Running would have been an admission. I walked faster. The humming moved too, neither closer nor farther, as if it lived in the atmosphere around me and could adjust to the way I stepped. I passed the vending machine again at the far path exit and stepped back onto the street. Traffic noise hit me like a reminder that the world existed. I didn't look back until I reached the main corner, where a convenience store clerk was tossing a Tide trash bag into the curb pile. If I'd been the kind of person who tells strangers what's wrong, I might have said to him, "Do you ever hear humming from the cemetery?" But I had the sudden feeling that saying it would be like turning a rumor into a curse. I nodded to him instead and hurried on. I didn't sleep well. Not because of anything grand. My apartment is tiny and hot in summer, and the window faces a neon sign that blinks every 5 seconds like a heartbeat. When I slept, I dreamed I was a child sitting in the back of a small car, watching the back of a woman's head. She drove without moving her hands. The road was lined with paper that folded itself into birds as we went. When I woke for water, my phone was on the floor where I dropped it in my half-sleep. I plugged it in and, mostly to distract myself, scrolled through my gallery. There were photographs I hadn't taken. The first was of the path entrance where I'd stepped off the street the night before, slightly off level like someone had held the phone too low. The timestamp was U047, which matched when I would have been there. The second was of the cluster of paper cranes, but closer than I had been, closer than I would have crouched, like the phone had been laid on the ground among them. The third was of the inscription. The fourth showed the unfolded squares of paper with the charcoal rubbings. The fifth was all stone, gray, no focus point, just texture. Each shot was a little closer to the surface. My heart did the slow lift thing like in elevators. I told myself I had taken them and simply forgot because I was nervous. I scrolled more. The shots didn't stop. Stone, closer stone, then darkness, then a warped reflective surface. Polished granite that had caught the phone lens like an eye catches its own reflection in a window. The last image wasn't black. It was a warped picture from inside that reflection, like a point of view from behind the stone peering outward through a thin gloss. In it, I could see a smear of my own face, bent strange, and behind me, a vague shape of someone standing where I had stood, the posture of a person holding a baby against the shoulder. I stared until the screen dimmed, then brightened it with a jerky finger. I told myself that a glitch could do this. People have had phones snap pictures in pockets, but the framing was wrong for an accident. The sequence suggested a decision. I tried to delete them. The phone froze and then closed the gallery on its own. When I opened it again, the photos were still there. I put the phone face down on the table and left it there like a glass of water I'd been warned not to spill. Work was normal. Normal is the best word in the language when you need it. Okada was cranky about a correction from a client who didn't know what they wanted. Aya brought in a convenience store pudding and stole half of mine anyway. The footage took too long to transcode, so we ordered curry and pretended deadlines were an urban myth. I didn't mention the cemetery to anyone. I didn't want the thing to solidify into story shape. Stories are fun until they start telling you. 2 nights later, when the air had cooled slightly and a typhoon slid past the coast, I missed the last train again. It happens in clusters like bad sleep or good hair days. Aya saw my face and said, "I can call a taxi. My uncle is a driver." I wanted to say yes. I said, "I'll walk. I need the air." On the street, the convenience store lights looked too bright again. When you've noticed something once, the world keeps lining up the same angles so you'll notice it again. I told myself I wouldn't take the shortcut. I walked 2 blocks along the main road in the right direction. Then a small knot in my chest untied itself with the dumb thought that I needed to prove I hadn't been spooked. I veered down the quieter side street. The vending machine by the cemetery entrance glowed like a tiny embassy of normal, filled with water bottles and lemon soda and coffee in tall tins. A cat watched me from the wall with that cat expression that says we are irrelevant, except for our hands opening tuna cans. The cranes were back on the grave, crisp again, as if no one had touched them since the first time and yet someone had redone them. I hadn't planned to stop, but I did. There was a small thermos tucked beside the toy car now, and a hair tie looped around its cap. Mothers collect hair ties in handfuls. That thought arrived and then didn't want to leave. I whispered, "Good evening," which is not a thing I'd have admitted to doing before last summer, and the air took the words and didn't give them back. "Excuse me?" a voice said behind me. I jumped and turned. A man in a janitor's cap stood a few paces back on the path, hands empty, posture apologetic. He looked like a caretaker or someone hired to keep the place tidy at odd hours. He was older than my father, perhaps, with the posture of someone who used to be stronger than he currently felt. His voice was gentle enough that the hair on my arm settled again. "Are you all right?" he asked. "It's late." "I'm okay," I said, then realized that okay is what you say to reassure both people. "I missed the train." He said. "This is not a place for shortcuts at night." "I've walked through before," I said. Which was technically true if before includes once and it went weird. "Yes," he said. And his look said he knew I was not the only one who had said that. He glanced at the grave with the cranes. He had the expression of someone thinking of a thing he wants to talk around. "People leave gifts," he said. "The child liked cars." He said the name softly. I didn't catch it. "The mother comes early. She hums to him." I didn't ask who him was. It was clear. Do you ever hear it at night?" I asked. It felt dumb as it left my mouth. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. He just pressed his lips together. "There are hours when the gates want to be closed." I nodded because that objectively sounded like a thing that could be true. He added, "Some nights the phones take pictures by themselves. Maybe it is the fog. Or it is the hands using what we carry." He made the smallest gesture with his fingers like he had placed something invisible on a table. "If you go this way," he said, and he pointed along the path, "please keep your eyes on the ground. Don't use the reflective stones for mirrors. They remember better than we do." It was such a strange sentence that I felt a laugh bubble up and die at the same time. I thanked him and moved on down the path because going backward felt like telling a lie about where I meant to be. I didn't look into the black polish of any tall stones. I kept my eyes on the gravel before my feet, on the little weeds that punched through the sand, on the occasional coin someone had left at a base. 30 steps later, the humming began. It was softer than before. It was right behind my right ear, the way a mother bends to murmur not to wake anyone else. I didn't run. I didn't speed up. I started counting under my breath, not out of any ritual, but because it gave my lungs something to obey. 1, 2, 3, 4, the way I do when I need to hold a steady pan in the studio. When the numbers reached 10, the humming shifted to match my pacing. That felt ridiculous and terrifying. I could feel a shape to the tune now. Not a song I knew exactly, but not entirely foreign. I thought of the caretaker saying the mother hums in the morning. And an ugly thought arrived. Some lullabies are also good for keeping things asleep. At the exit, the vending machine looked like an altar to beverages and normalcy. I stood in its light like someone waiting for a bus that wouldn't come. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out. The screen displayed the camera app open by itself. The shutter icon pulsed softly as if breathing. I tapped to close. It stayed open. I pressed the power button. The screen went black and then lit back to the camera again. as if something had politely insisted we keep going. I pointed it at my shoes just to make it less of a face-to-face. The shutter clicked once without my finger moving. On the street, a police car rolled slowly past, the officers inside having that patient expression reserved for summer midnight calls. I lifted a hand as if to wave them down and then didn't. What would I say? Something is taking pictures with my phone, which is either a tech support call or a cry for help. I watched the car glide away and felt a childish urge to follow it like it would tow me out. Back at my apartment, I put the phone on the table again and didn't look at it for an hour. When I did, there were new photos. A series again, logical as numbers. The path entrance, the grave, the cranes, the inscription, the unfolded paper squares, the surface of stone, a reflection bending light and faces, a shape of a woman holding a small bundle against her shoulder. The last image had something I hadn't seen before. The outline of a hand touching the reflective surface from the inside, as if smoothing a wrinkle, as if testing the barrier. The fingers were long and ordinary, the nails plain. I put the phone down with the strangled care you reserve for fragile things that might bite. I told Aya the next day. I didn't give her the whole thing, just that my phone had weird photos and maybe I needed to factory reset. She said, "Let me see," with the confidence of someone who knows how to search every menu. We scrolled together. She frowned at the images. "When did you take these?" she asked. "I didn't," I said, which sounded silly in an office with fluorescent lights and a plant we called Mr. Green because none of us can keep anything alive. "It's the cemetery by—" I started and she stopped with a small sound like a drop of water hitting a metal sink. "I know that place," she said. "My mother took me there when I was little for a funeral. There was a woman who lost her child. She sang like she was talking to him in the next room." "Weird thing to remember," I said, and immediately felt mean for saying it. "She gave me a crane," Aya said, and I didn't have a good sentence to respond with. Then she asked, "What happens if we mirror the last image?" She flipped it. The reflected world became my room in the warped plane. The table, the crooked window neon, a smudge of my own shoulder. The handprints on the inside of the stone aligned for a second with the outline of my camera lens. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of light or if the image had shifted infinitesimally, the way pictures sometimes do when your thumb brushes the screen and you think they're moving, but it's your hand. "Reset your phone," Okada said when he overheard the word mirror, walking by with a cup of coffee. "Or stop taking spooky pictures. They're not on the shot list." We laughed a little because you have to. That night I took a taxi. I didn't feel brave or adult about it. I felt like someone who had learned to step around holes in the street that only some people fall through. I slept better. Then the week after, I dreamed I was walking along the cemetery path with my mother, who was humming even though she doesn't hum. And when I woke, there were pictures again. I hadn't gone near the place. I checked my location history to make sure I wasn't sleepwalking in complicated efficient circuits. The phone insisted I had stayed home. The photos insisted otherwise. The building walls were the same. The reflective stone wasn't the same, but the angle of the light was, and the last picture included a detail that closed something cold around my neck. The tiny toy car in the ceramic cup, but now the cup was in my apartment, sitting carefully on my low table like someone had placed it there to keep it safe. It wasn't there when I looked. I checked the table. I checked the floor. I checked the top of my fridge where I put my few treasures that aren't worth anything. There was no cup. It was only in the picture. But I had the terrible conviction that if I went back to the cemetery, the cup would be missing from the grave. And then this would not be a story anymore, but an account to the police. They would ask me where I put it. I would not have a good answer. I didn't go back. For 3 weeks, I rerouted my life to avoid any line that would pull me near that place. I slept with the phone in another room, which is an old trick that makes nightmares as stubborn as houseplants. Move them, and they adapt. The photos stopped for a while. Then new ones appeared. Not night shots, but daytime. The path lit differently. The shadow of a person falling longer and shorter as the sun moved. The sequence progressed the same way. Not like a person walking, but like a practice. The last picture was again the reflective surface and again a strange, warped interior. In it, you could see me at my table, forehead in my hand, and the faintest impression of someone standing behind me with a bundle against her shoulder, humming a tune that the picture could not contain but that I could hear anyway, because I'd heard it before. I asked my sister to stay over. I told her I was having trouble sleeping. I didn't tell her what was wrong. She brought snacks and face masks and one of those tiny handheld fans people carry in summer that sound like a mosquito too lazy to bite. We watched a dumb show where people pretend not to be actors. She fell asleep on the futon with her head tilted back in a way that would hurt mine. I lay awake listening to the neon sign's regular pulse and the white noise of the fan. Around 2, a quiet humming rose into the room as if it were steam coming off a cup of tea. I sat up. Mina stirred and turned over and didn't wake. The phone lit on its own on the table, not bright, just a square of presence in the dark. The camera opened. I didn't move. The phone took a picture, then another, then another. I reached for it like you'd reach for an insect trying to protect it from a child who might squish it. I didn't touch the screen. I placed my hand over the lens. The shutter clicked once more, a photo of my palm, lines and wrinkles and a life I recognized. The humming paused and then picked up again, almost approving. In the quiet afterward, I thought I heard the tiny shuffle of paper, the rustle of small wings. The next morning I looked. There were images of my apartment taken from a low child's eye height. The table leg looked huge. The cup of pens was a tower. My sister's sleeping face was the soft landscape of a moon. The last image was the reflective surface of my window with the neon beyond, bent into a shiny river, and the inside of the reflection like a room behind a mirror. Shadows and light reversed, angles all wrong. In that reversed room, a woman stood with her head inclined, holding something small against her shoulder. She was so ordinary she might have been anyone's mother. Her hair was pulled back with a simple tie. Her posture was that tilt only mothers do when they carry a weight that is familiar. The thing against her shoulder was not clear, not because the camera had failed, but because some things don't want to be defined. In the surface of the window, my own warped face stood inches away, looking in. There are people who would say I should never have walked through that place at night. There are people who would say grief makes certain doors in the air open wider than they should. There are people who would say I have a glitchy phone and an overactive imagination. I'll accept all of that. I'll even accept that there might have been a way to end it if I had done something very specific at some untold moment. Tapped the glass 3 times, left milk, changed my route, bowed more deeply. We don't get instructions. We get acts and their echoes. It's been months. The cranes, when I pass in daytime with someone else, are sometimes folded, sometimes flat. I have not checked to see whether the cup is there or not. The caretaker nods when we accidentally catch eyes, the way you nod to someone else who knows the location of a quiet hazard in the city and will not call attention to it. The humming threads sometimes through the noise of daily life, the train door chime, the water boiler, the air conditioner that rattles on the first humid day. My phone still occasionally wakes at night and takes a handful of pictures. They are rarely dramatic. Once it photographed the shadow of a person in my doorway that the morning light insisted was a coat on a chair. Once it captured a corner of my screen where the weather app shows windless. 3 times it has caught the reflective surface of something. A kettle, a window, the polished lid of a bento, and behind that smoothness, the suggestion of a room that looks like mine and doesn't, where someone stands and hums like she is keeping a child from waking too fully, and where the angle of the light makes it easy to imagine my own face looking back from the wrong side. I do not want to test that line. I don't hold the phone over polished stone anymore. I don't look long into any surface that can hold a reflection. When the last train is pulling out and a coworker says, "Come on, we can cut through the cemetery," I tell them the vending machines on the other side are out of order and the cats are in a bad mood and the trees have decided to breathe differently. They laugh and we walk the long way, under reliable fluorescent signs and the steady electric hush of a city that has learned how to sleep with one eye open. I tell myself that humility counts, that not touching counts, that being small in the right moments counts. At night, when I hear humming under the noise of the air conditioner, I think about the caretaker's words, that mirrors remember better than we do. Somewhere there is a reflection of me, bent to listen, and behind that version is the shape of an ordinary woman with a bundle on her shoulder, humming the sound of staying, humming the sound of waiting, humming a tune that doesn't end but also doesn't resolve. If this is nothing, then I've lost nothing by writing it down. If it's not nothing, then maybe this is me acknowledging the door without opening it, like leaving flowers for a name I don't recognize on a stone that keeps recording who walks by. I never meant to walk through a cemetery at midnight in Tokyo. If you ever miss your last train and think about taking a shortcut, know that someone might already be matching your steps, just close enough to keep time. I don't post much, and when I do, it's usually about archive finds or odd museum trivia, not this. But last week I was walking to the tube and realized I'd started hugging the far right side of the pavement, like I was making space for someone I couldn't see, and the part of me that still likes data and dates said, write it down while your hands aren't shaking. So here it is. I'll keep names where I can because, unlike most ghost stories, this one hates being vague. I'm a part-time historian, part-time cataloger, bit of a freelancer for small heritage trusts around London. The job right now is Highgate's Western Cemetery. Angel statues, wing repairs, missing hands, moss patterns. The sort of thing that sounds boring until you spend an evening alone among stone faces that have outlived every weatherman who ever warned them about drizzle. My friend Tom thinks it's romantic in that ruined way. He does sound for a tiny true story podcast, just him and a borrowed Zoom recorder, and an audience that leaves polite comments with punctuation that looks like rain. He asked if he could tag along one evening to record ambience. You know, he said, Fox Sparks leaves you muttering about lichens. People love that stuff. We picked a Monday in late September. The office tucked by the West Cemetery gate smelled like old paper and cold tea. The groundskeeper on duty, Mrs. Ellery, slid a key ring across the desk with the caution you give an animal that might bolt. You're done by dusk, she said, not unkindly. No later. Torch at all times. No shortcuts off the main paths. The whisper is closed, and I mean closed. I laughed in that automatic way you do when people name a path like it's a person. The whisper? She looked at me for a moment like she was deciding whether to hand me another key or a story. Little path behind the Egyptian Avenue, she said. It doesn't exist on the public map. Slips behind monuments where the ivy makes tunnels. People who go down there come back spooked with manners they didn't have before. She tapped her temple. Not bad manners, you understand? Too much of the other kind? Excuse me, after you. No, I insist, all by themselves in the dark. Keep to the main. If you hear anyone, call security. We don't do heroics. Tom grinned like he'd just been handed a basket of microphones. We'll be boring as bricks, he said. Promise. Dusk hasn't got a clock, but you know it when it starts cupping its hands around your eyes. We set up near the Circle of Lebanon, the big cedar whose roots are strong enough to hold a decade in place. I clipped a lav mic to my jacket and started talking to future me. Weather cool, slight breeze from the north. Angel number 32. Both wings intact. Left wrist lichen colonization of about 20%. Victorian morning symbolism in vine pattern. Tom crouched by the path, running a fluffy windscreen, he calls it a dead cat, which I hate, over the Zoom. A fox barked downslope and a bus sighed out on Swain's Lane and a plane sketched a thin white letter you couldn't read. It was peaceful. When you work with the dead, you start to gauge peace by absence. No drunk shouts from the road, no teenagers, daring each other to hop the fence, no sudden gusts that turn pages without asking. Even the angels looked like they were listening with grave patience, which is a bad joke that I didn't say out loud. We moved slow. The kind of slow where your feet memorize the ground and your brain wanders to your shopping list, your emails, the milk you forgot. Tom wandered ahead, chasing a tiny clicking noise he swore was a beetle. I kept my beam low so I didn't blind the stone. When we reached the Egyptian Avenue, tall stone, names you pronounce with your mouth like a handle, I remembered what Mrs. Ellery had said and felt stupid for remembering it. The narrow path off to the side was a seam of darkness where the ivy stitched two monuments together. A wooden sign hung askew on a nail. The paint had gone to the kind of gray that makes you guess it used to be red. CLOSED, it said, if you did the work of imagining letters. Is that the whisper? Tom said, not quite whispering, because of course he's the sort of person who can't resist stepping on a pun while filming its funeral. I don't. No, I said, because I didn't, and also because I didn't want to inflate it by naming it. We're not going down it. Copy, he said cheerfully, and held the recorder toward the gap the way you hold a glass near the rain to hear it ping. There was nothing. Not silence. because there's never silence, but a nothing that was made of small things. The hiss of leaves rubbing cozily together, the tiniest rattling breath of a pigeon shifting on stone, the electrical sigh of London itself. And then, quietly, politely, just behind my left shoulder, "Excuse me." The words were breathy the way old recording cylinders sound, as if a gentleman had leaned back from a cigar and decided to use air like a soft glove. I swung the torch so fast I nearly hit Tom in the teeth. No one was there. It's a phrase that doesn't hold still very well, so I'll say it again. There was no one there. Just the path behind us, and the path ahead, and the path that was closed. Tom's eyes were shining because he assumed it was a human whisper, and he loved nothing more than catching humans ambiently. "Say again," he said, stupidly polite himself, then glanced at me and mouthed, "Did you say that?" I shook my head. It wasn't even adrenaline, not yet. Just that prickle you get when a waiter says, "Are you still working on that?" And you realize they've come up behind your soul. I turned my head because that's what animals do when they want to smell a thing without smelling like they're afraid of it. Nothing. But when I looked back at my feet, there was a bit of cream paper tucked neatly under the edge of my boot. It wasn't there before. I will fight you gently about that. I take care of where I step. It wasn't there. I picked it up with 2 fingers because damp makes paper misbehave. It was a Victorian mourning card, a little rectangle of heavy stock, with beveled edges, black border, the kind of thing that announces sorrow without punctuation. There was no name, none of the standard verses about lilies and sleep. Just a neat printed in memoriam, and below it in hand, thin ink the color of tea. "Thank you for coming at last." I didn't show Tom. I don't know why. Maybe because the phrase hit me in a place I didn't know was tender until then. My roots are not English. My grandparents were, but my parents were not. And London and I have been mutually tolerant but not affectionate. At last, in someone else's hand, felt like a door someone else had promised would never open. "Could be someone having a laugh," Tom said softly, seeing my face but not the card. "We'll circle back. If it's that, they'll get bored. If it's not, we'll have something to show for once." We kept cataloging because that's the personality of the job. You keep going until the list goes to sleep. The card burned in my pocket like a small, well-mannered coal. At the next angel, I put it inside my notebook and shut both as if that would make the ink forget me. The darkness moved around us like an animal that has decided you're not worth the trouble. The torch picked out names that read like riddles when you held them at the wrong angle. I said numbers into the mic and Tom recorded what leaves sound like when they do their best impression of water. Then the recorder picked up a mistake you only hear later. I didn't know that until I played it back at home. On the night itself, what we noticed was something different, a small habit of sound that made my scalp lift. Every time Tom and I were close enough to block the path, any path, even the short, obvious ones, a single step sounded behind us, followed by the barest intake of breath like someone waiting for the right moment to pass without brushing your coat. The thing about courtesy is it has a noise. It's half air and half hesitation. It was that. "Okay," I said after the 3rd time. And I can't tell you why my voice came out as if I was hosting a tour, but perhaps the angels prefer it. "If someone's having us on, we're not biting." And we stood aside. That's the part I'm embarrassed to write. We moved obediently to the right-hand edge of the path, the way you do on escalators, and left a clear lane through the middle, and nothing moved down it. But something moved through us or past us or spoke in the space we made. I felt a tug on the line of my coat, that nothing sort of tug you get when a door opens somewhere nearby. Tom's mouth opened like he was going to say wow in a respectful whisper, and then he shut it again and swallowed, which on the recorder sounds like a small boat nudging its moorings. "Don't be ridiculous," he said a full minute later, which tells you how ridiculous it was. "I'm going to grab 5 seconds by that closed sign." And before I could find the correct sentence to say no with, he'd padded toward the gap in the ivy. "Tom," I said, "because names are what you throw when you have nothing else in your hand. It's off limits." "Just the edge," he said, and stretched the recorder arm into the seam of dark the way you might test the temperature of water. "We don't have to go down. I just want to hear if the whisper is, whispering. From the recorder there was ivy scratch, a small mouse idea running under leaves. My own breath pretending it wasn't hurried. Then, "Excuse me." Again behind me, but closer this time. The idea of a face near the hinge of my jaw. I stepped aside without meaning to. Tom didn't move. The polite breath hovered a second longer, as if embarrassed. "Excuse me," it said again, with a little more shape to the vowels, those old-fashioned rounded ones that wear gloves even when they're just saying vowel. "Right," Tom said. "Sorry." He stepped back, letting the gap in the ivy have air. I hate writing this because it makes us sound trained, but it felt rude not to. I don't mean social media rude. I mean church rude. I mean you're in a place where hello must be whispered about 10 times before it counts. I decided to get us out. It wasn't a plan so much as a correct impulse, like putting a library book in the return slot when you haven't finished it. I put my hand on Tom's sleeve. "We're done." "It's enough," Mrs. Ellery said. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, sure." But he was looking into the ivy crease where the dark lay like a folded napkin. He held the recorder there, and I saw in the little screen that the levels were up just a bit, as if sound, something very quiet, very reasonable, was filling a room we couldn't enter. We turned. The path we'd come on had not moved. Paths don't move. But the sense of which way was the way out had tilted. Maybe the light shifted. Maybe the hill made a joke. Or maybe this is where you stop reading, and that's fine. We went the other way to check, intending to swing around via a larger loop. The cemetery has honest geometry. You can't really get lost if you remember the cedar and the big crypts and the slope. But the double of our path led us to a narrower run, one I didn't remember. The ivy here had braided itself into a tunnel that only a child could love crawling through. Tom held the torch low and I kept my head ducked, and we walked not far. Not long, just enough to realize it wasn't going to spit us out anywhere familiar. "Lovely," Tom said, trying for sarcasm and landing on breathless. "We've been politely kidnapped by a path. We're going back," I said. "Right now." And we did, except that back wasn't the way you think of it. We turned and found ourselves looking at another narrow seam that might be the same seam but wasn't. The cemetery is old and honest. It doesn't play hedge maze games. But the ivy had ideas of citizenship, and we were not part of its council. That's when a light swung toward us from the main path. Warm, slightly yellow, the human color of torches with batteries that have known other nights. "Oi," someone called in that clipped security guard way that means you are not in trouble yet, but you could be. "You all right there?" Relief is the kind of weather that makes you realize how thirsty you've been. We stepped toward the voice in the light, and the ivy parted as if the guard had some horticultural sovereignty. A young man in a high-vis vest stood on the main path, torch hip-high, the expression of someone who has known foxes and couples and Instagram photographers and likes none of them after sunset. He glanced at our badges, then up at our faces like he was matching us to the photos. "Not supposed to be in the side runs," he said. "Mrs. Ellery's rules." "Come on, then." "We heard someone," Tom said, because Tom has a soul that can't let a sound go by undocumented. Kept saying, "Excuse me." The guard's face did not change. "This is a skill you learn in jobs where night is a coworker. You'll hear a lot of things here," he said. "They're mostly foxes and other things you can't put on forms." He guided us back toward the main, and if the path had any more opinions, it kept them to itself. "Mind your feet." Back in the office, we signed the key book with hands that must have looked normal but felt rubbered. Mrs. Ellery poured tea into 2 mugs that said London in letters shaped like suitcases and watched us drink like we were batteries she was topping up. "You kept to the shutdown?" she asked, which was less a question and more a reminder of the shape of rules. "We did," I said. I didn't tell her about stepping into the edge or about the card in my notebook, because I am a coward about being laughed at by people with sensible shoes. "We heard someone. Probably not a someone." She said, tea sip. "It's a bad habit the place has." People lean into it. "What do you mean, bad habit?" I asked. I don't know why. Maybe because the phrase made me think of a friar's robe, something worn every day until it eats your shoulders. She looked at me for that long old person moment again, then nodded toward a clipboard of incident reports. "We get apologies," she said. "Left in notes. Slipped under doors. That path breeds it. Not poltergeist, no smashing, no injury. Just courtesy until it's not. Had a man last year who started letting everyone go ahead of him. Everywhere, trains, lifts, pavements. Wouldn't push through a pub door for a month. Said he could hear breath behind him wherever he went. Patient and genteel. Wife brought him back here like a dog to a garden where it left a ball. Sometimes returning a thing is all that works. We went home. This is the part I suppose looks like the end. The "we were safe then" bit where the reader gets to close the book and the characters get to pretend they can sleep inside its covers. I took the tube. A man with a newspaper stood near the door with his elbows in the angle of carriage and words. When the doors opened at archway, I stepped aside automatically and let 3 people off, then 2 on. Then a kid with a scooter that had no business on a train. It felt correct. It felt excellent. It felt like a clean shirt. The morning card was in my notebook. I took it out on my kitchen table like it might spill. It looked clearer under my lamp, older and gentler, as if paper gets more adult when you give it heat. "Thank you for coming at last," it said in tea-colored ink that had dried like it had done that job many times. My phone buzzed. Tom. "Send me a copy of your notes," he texted. "Also, I just checked the levels from the whisper bit. There's nothing at human voice volume. But there's something. It's like a breath that learned how to spell." We listened together later that night. 2 chairs, 1 laptop, 1 borrowed Zoom that looked innocent. You know, when you play a file expecting to hear wind and your own nose and maybe a Fox surprise, and instead what comes through is a gentleman leaning his manners into your ear. The first time it happened on the recording, I flinched, which is ridiculous because it's your own house. The voice wasn't a voice. It was the shape that voices make around words, but it found syllables where air shouldn't have any. "Excuse me." And then, when Tom steps back and holds the gap like it's a door he's opening for a stranger, you hear something like soil settle. Not a shovel, not a collapse, just that soft rushing sound when you pat a grave and it sighs because it knows its job. After that, "Thank you for coming at last." It wasn't Tom, it wasn't me. And the cadence. It's hard to explain this part without sounding like I'm making it special because it touched me. But the cadence carried a hint of an old name. The name my grandmother would write on Christmas tags when she wanted to remind us we had come from somewhere, even if the place had decided it had not come from us. I played the phrase again until it made itself ordinary by repetition, and then strange again by refusing. "Maybe it's a loop," Tom said, "which is the way you throw a rope across a gap you can't leap. Someone last century said it and the stone remembered. Stuff like that happens, right?" "Right," I lied because I wanted it to be true and because lies can be polite when they mean well. Over the next week, nothing theatrical happened. Think less chandeliers, more door frames. I slept fine. My kettle, which had been threatening to die, continued to threaten and then lied like a bad actor by boiling loudly. My neighbor downstairs played the same 3 songs in rotation, 2 cheerful, 1 like a washing machine grieving, and I took the recycling out and confronted the jungle of dominoes that is adult life. But I noticed small edits to my day. When I reached a crossing and someone else reached at the same time, I would gesture them through and feel relief so clean it was almost medicinal. On the stairs to my flat, if a body's weight sighed behind me on the 2nd floor landing, I tucked myself to the right without resentment, without even thinking, and waited for invisible shoes to pass in the air I left. They never did, but the air felt used. In the museum reading room, a man in a tweed jacket who smelled like newspaper apologized to me for a chair scrape. "Excuse me," he said, as if he'd read the line from a script. I said "please" the way you say please to keep a door open. I didn't look behind me when I left. I didn't want to see if the door swung because air had hands. The 2nd Thursday after Highgate, I went back, not to be brave, but because I needed to finish the catalog, and because pretending to be brave is the adult version of routine. I told Tom last minute, thinking he'd come, but he texted a rain of apologies. "Flu, fever, terribly sorry, etc." He added, "Maybe best you don't go alone," which rankled me enough that I replied, "I won't be. There's half of London in there if you count properly." He sent a skull emoji that wasn't funny. It was earlier this time. Late afternoon doing its best summer impression. The cedar cast its good shade and the angels looked bored in the way immortal things do when mortals keep remarking on weather. I said numbers into the recorder, because muscle memory likes a microphone. When I reached the Egyptian Avenue, I kept to the main. The wooden sign still leaned on its old nail like an elderly shoulder. The seam of ivy air looked like the throat of a polite thing that had already decided what the evening's conversation would be. "Not today," I said out loud, because my grandmother taught me to talk to rooms as if they were very shy, very rich people who might tip if you were kind. I've got a list. Excuse me, it said. Not behind me, but from within the seam, as if the path had found a voice box. I stood aside. What else would you have me do? A robin darted into the ivy mouth and out again like punctuation, checking its options. That small soil sigh happened without anyone touching anything. And then, this is the only part I'll allow myself to call request. The whisper waited. It didn't push. It didn't repeat. It left a space for me to walk into. I have a stubborn streak I dress up as ethics. I didn't go in. I stood, and then I took a respectful half-step back and made the kind of bow you can hide in a nod. Another time, I said, because I am weak, but not entirely. If you like. Something tugged at my heel, a soft pull like fabric forgetting it's attached to skin. I looked down. Another card had tucked itself under my boot. It's an action that would look silly if a person tried to do it without you noticing, but the path has no hands to be clumsy with. I picked it up. Another cream rectangle, another sober border. This one said in that tea-stain hand, "We will walk with you." Not wait for, not lead, with. I put the card in my notebook because that's what you do when a thing tries to be a document. I finished my angel list with the kind of attention you bring to washing sharp glasses. The light went down obediently. I left before dusk's hands cupped my eyes again. I dropped the keys with Mrs. Ellery and didn't tell her about the card, because I have learned that some things get taller when you speak them, and I'm not in the business of giving ghosts good posture. Tom got better. He came over with ginger biscuits and that look people have when they don't want to ask if you're haunted. We sat with the recorder and the old sound and the new silence, and the cards on the table like the world's worst polite invitation. "It isn't asking you to die," he said, which is a sentence I had not let pass my teeth. "It's asking you to walk." "With what?" I said. "With who?" he corrected, then realized, and rubbed his face with both hands and laughed, which came out like a cough that lost its place. I took one of the cards and slipped it into my jacket pocket where library cards and receipts and kindness go to be forgotten until they decide not to be. I've been walking differently since. My body makes rooms for things that aren't there. I step aside for air that sighs its gratitude in a voice that belongs in another century. When I think I'm alone on a street, I'm not. Not in a frightened way. In a way that makes the pavement feel like it's remembering. Sometimes, just as my foot lifts, a breath behind me shapes the beginning of a syllable the way your mouth shapes a word before you trust it. Sometimes the syllable finishes. Excuse me. I let it through and I go on. Yesterday morning, a funeral procession passed down my road. Quiet, dark cars, two men in flat caps walking in front, the world holding its coat differently for a second. I stood aside, though I didn't have to, and bowed my head a fraction, which is a skill the dead teach badly and the living learn too late. As the last car went by, something in my pocket warmed. I reached in. The first card, the one with the "thank you for coming at last," had slipped from my notebook without help and now lay against my palm, as if it had always planned to. My phone buzzed. "Tom again. Random," he wrote, but I was editing ambience from that night. At timestamp 16:14:06, just before we leave, there's a faint secondary track, like footprints in frost. If you can you record your walk home tonight? Just curious what it sounds like to the path. I didn't answer. I went out. I walked the long way, the way that gives buses a chance to clear their throats and pigeons a chance to make poor choices around bread. I kept right without thinking. A woman with a pram came the other way and I stepped off the curb to let her pass, and she smiled the tired royal smile of mothers forgiven by pavements. "Thanks," she said. "Excuse me," said something just behind my ear, near the part of the world where air warms when it has chosen you. I stood aside. The space I made felt occupied for a heartbeat, then empty again, or not empty, just done with being used. If you want a clean ending, take this. Last night I put both cards under a heavy book as if weight could argue with them. In the small hours, I woke to a sound that wasn't much. Soil adjusting somewhere, the building settling, my neighbor's washing machine apologizing to the universe. I got a glass of water. On the way back to bed, I found both cards on the floor, side by side, not where I had left them. The book sat there with all its gravity, confused. On both cards, the tea-stain ink had dried a fraction darker. On one, mine, the words looked the same. On the other, a new line had crept under the first in handwriting my grandmother would have squinted at and smiled about later. "We thank you. I don't expect anyone to believe me. You don't have to. It's not a threat or a curse or a romance. It's a habit. A path that behaves like a person who was raised well in a century, when air had better manners. If you go, go before dusk, keep to the main, and if you hear that breath, learn how to spell behind you, don't panic. Step to the side, make room. Something that learned patience in the ground will slip past with a gratitude that sounds like a word. Maybe you'll find a card forgiving you for being late to a thing you didn't know you were invited to. Maybe, like me, you'll start stepping aside in places where no one is. And maybe you'll feel foolish, and maybe you'll feel right. And if one day in your flat or on a train or standing by a hedge, you hear soil sigh without being touched, and a gentleman tell you thank you for coming at last, you'll understand why I keep finding the cards in my coat, and why I've stopped walking in the middle of any path at all. I wasn't planning to write this because I don't like feeding the campus ghost stories, but last week a new first year sat next to me in anatomy and whispered, "Is it true you slept in Belen once?" I laughed it off, said nobody sleeps there, and tried to focus on the brachial plexus, but her question stuck like humidity. Heavy, clinging, and I realized the whole thing has been replaying in my head every few nights anyway. Maybe typing it out will file it somewhere in my brain where it stops waking me at 3 a.m., with that same sound, the soft slap of wet skin on tile, keeping time with our own steps and then stopping when we stopped. It was during my second year at the university in Guadalajara, mid-October, but before the altars started appearing in storefronts. The air was thick and warm and stubbornly still, the kind of night where the sky feels like it's pressing down with its palms but never squeezes out any rain. Carmen and Rafa and I had been studying late in the hospital library, and we drifted onto the topic everyone in our building eventually drifts, toward the Pantheon de Belen, usually through someone's cousin who swears they saw a light move inside a sealed tomb or heard a child humming from the wall. The cemetery sits just behind the old civil hospital, which means we pass it on the way to morning rotations. Some days we'd watch the tour groups with their guide and their flashlights, people giggling because it's safer to laugh when you're walking between vaults with angels whose faces are melting from time. We weren't those tours. We were medical students. We label fragile things and keep a pencil behind our ears. We outgrow fear. That was the story I told myself. Carmen is the kind of person who says yes for the sake of saying yes. She twisted the end of her braid around her index finger and said we should test the legends like we would test a hypothesis. Go in, measure our heart rates, time how long we lasted, make notes. Rafa pretended he didn't care, but he immediately started pulling up old legends on his phone. The vampire tree, the monk who counts, the plague dead, candles that light for souls without family. He pointed at the vampire tree and said he'd bring a pocket knife to look at the sap. If it runs red, I'll buy churros for a month, and I told him not to be a jerk. We made a dumb bet, 1 hour in the cemetery after the last tour left. No jumping out to scare each other. No leaving early. If anyone bailed, they had to buy cafeteria coffees for all 3 of us for a week. The gate creaked the way you want a cemetery gate to creak. That's not a poetic flourish. The old metal really does scream in complaint, even if you're careful. Don Javier, the night watchman, knows us by face because we cross his corner every day. He raised his cigarette and gave a tired smile. "Students otra vez," he said, shaking his head. "No tocar nada. Don't touch anything." He made us promise to stay on the main paths and to call if we saw anyone inside who wasn't supposed to be there. "It happens," he said. "People cut through, lovers, thieves looking for copper, and sometimes the kids from the neighborhood come to dare each other to stand beside a certain mausoleum until they start hearing their name." He said it like a warning and like he didn't blame them. Nobody blames kids for making big feelings happen where big feelings are already stored. We left our bikes chained at the fence and stepped in. It always surprises me how clean Belen is. I think of a graveyard as dirt and grass and ants, but Belen is tiled in places, stone walkways in others, the mausoleum set like small houses along narrow lanes. The angels rise from them with their hands out. Some are missing fingers. The tiles are the kind of glazed ceramic our grandmothers put behind sinks, and at night they hold the little bit of heat from the day and give it back in a damp way that makes the air smell faintly of mineral and candle wax. Even when no candle is burning, the hospital's white facade glowed behind the cypresses. A few windows were still lit. A nurse's silhouette passed by one of them, and then there were just shadows. The tours had finished 15 minutes earlier. We heard the last guide sweep his light, telling his stories in the practiced rhythm of people who can talk while counting heads, and then the beam went away. We checked our watches. It was 11:05 p.m. We weren't completely stupid. We set boundaries. Carmen marked a point near the center, a statue of a weeping woman with a chipped nose, and said we'd walk the lanes that branched from there and keep each other in sight. We would not split up just to say we did. We wouldn't try to get into anything that was locked. She had a little notepad because she always has a little notepad. She wrote, Belen 2305, humid, no wind, no thunder, no tours. Rafa joked about taking a baseline blood pressure, but instead he took a selfie with the statue, then looked embarrassed, like he'd been the one to break the spell and now had to put it back together again. If you've never been there, you should know how sound behaves. Steps bounce. A cough becomes two coughs when the walls lean in on both sides. The cypresses move just enough to scrape each other, and it sounds like cloth on a nail. We were trying to be quiet, the way people try to be quiet inside a church, which only makes every small thing louder. Somewhere a dog barked a single uncertain bark and then gave up. The city traffic sounded like breathing with a cold. We worked our way along the first lane, reading names. A family from 1890. A boy, 14, 1902. A woman whose epitaph said, she was light. The yellow tiles on one of the mausoleums had been scrubbed harshly, leaving pale scratches, and I remember standing close to it and thinking about hands who loved someone enough to rub the tile until the grime gave up. Carmen wrote, tile warm to touch. It took 10 minutes for the dare to stop being a game. We turned a corner and saw a small, clean candle stub inside a sealed crypt, completely sealed. The little door welded shut and painted long ago, a candle that had definitely not been there when the tours left. A candle stump with a burned black wick and cooled puddle around it, as if someone had held it lit very close to the glass and then left it there. When I say inside, I mean past the glass, on the shelf with a porcelain photo of a young man whose eyes still looked wet. The candle itself wasn't lit, there was no flame. It was only the evidence of a flame. Carmen put her palm to the glass and pulled it back. Warm, she whispered, surprised at her own voice. I checked the seal. It wasn't trick glass. There was no gap where a draft might have put a flame out. We could have walked away, told ourselves the earlier tour did some theatrics, but we had all just been staring right where we were staring now a few minutes before, and there had been nothing. I can say that with the annoying certainty of a person who wanted to prove something. We kept moving and we started noticing more of them. Not a lot, not in every crypt. Just here and there, stubs of yellow wax like sun-baked teeth, as if someone had carried a pocketful of small candles and, with no one looking, opened the tender parts of the cemetery and left them where they meant something. I told myself that wax holds heat and that's all it was. It's a funny thing to believe when you're holding your breath without noticing, because some part of you thinks you can stop your own body from making enough sound to draw attention. By 11:30, we had looped back toward the center and then wandered to the older section, where the tiles give way to plain stone, and a narrow row of mausoleums faces another narrow row, the space between nothing but 3 careful steps wide. You could stretch your arms and touch both walls. The moon was hiding somewhere behind the white of the sky, and the only real light came from the hospital windows and the small emergency bulb over the gate by the entrance. The lanes are almost like hallways there, and you feel watched simply because the design insists on it. We were halfway down one of those corridors when we heard the additional steps. We were 3 and we heard 4 sets walking. It didn't sound like shoes. It sounded like wet skin on tile. Not loud, not exaggerated. Just there. Slap. Breath. Slap. Breath. And here is where I admit something I'm not proud of. My first thought was not a ghost story. My first thought was that someone was following us barefoot and maybe needed help. My second thought right after that was that if someone needed help, they would call out. I turned. Halfway through the second thought because the sound had already stopped cleanly, like a song cut from a radio. Carmen turned too, slow like she didn't want whoever it was to know we were looking. Rafa lifted his phone, ready to turn on the light, and I shook my head. Light makes squares on walls where there shouldn't be squares. We stood there, letting our hearts settle a notch. A leaf scuttled, helped by nothing we could feel. A mosquito bellied up to the side of my neck and I swatted it and felt stupid, because the little clap was a break in the quiet, and it made us all twitch. Rafa whispered, "Do you hear?" and didn't finish. The steps started again behind us, unhurried, matching the pace of our walk as soon as we started walking. I forced myself to set a rhythm like I was pacing a ward. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the fourth thing laid itself in the spaces between like a shy patient trying not to be noticed. When footsteps mimic yours, you can test them. You change tempo. You pause. We did both. At the bend in the corridor, we stopped, not wanting to find whoever was behind us at the composition of a dead end. The lane broke to the right toward a low wall and a wider path. The row of mausoleums to our left kept going. We stood, the extra steps stopped. Not the city, not the dog. Those continued. Only that specific soft sound ceased. I turned and looked down at the tile. Nothing. No shadow that wasn't ours. If you've ever stood in a place with other people and understood at the same instant you all came to a new belief together, you know the small, embarrassed comfort of it. We all believed there was someone there. We just didn't want to be the first to say it. Could be Javier, Rafa whispered. Checking. No, Carmen said. He has boots. I'll go, I said, and took 2 steps back the way we came. Because logic in a graveyard at midnight is a polite animal that comes when you call and sits with its chest against your leg for as long as you keep your voice even. I walked the steps we had just walked. I put my ear toward the spaces where the sound should have been if it were nervous skin on tile, and not rain that hadn't fallen. I touched the wall and felt the coolness that lives inside stone at night. Then I felt heat. Not warmth like hand against glass, heat like a breath. It came through the seam of one of the mausoleum doors, a seam that was not a seam because it was sealed shut. A whisper of warmer air, then a light, weak and brief, flared behind the square window, 2 fingers tall, maybe less buttery yellow, and went out before my eyes fully registered it. I stepped back because you cannot lean into an impossible thing without moving something in yourself that resists the next day's work. Did you see it? Carmen asked, and when I nodded, she wrote something tiny on her notepad that I read later and wished I hadn't looked at. Candles guttering. Not reflection. At 11:40, we heard a voice from the street, not inside the cemetery, beyond the fence. Boys with a speaker on a bike going past, laughing at something in a way that felt like the edge of safety. You forget how much you like other people until you are tucked inside a place that has instructions about staying quiet and not touching. The laughter scraped by and ended. We made ourselves get back to our practice of observation, because doing a familiar task when the unfamiliar pushes on you helps. I checked the names, read the dates out loud like that could anchor me. Petra Reyes, I said. 1954, Dr. Mira. Carmen wrote it down. Rafa said present, like we were calling roll. That's when the candles started in sequence. You'll think we're adding a flourish. I'd think it too, reading someone else. But I want to be as plain as I can. A row of 6 mausoleums faced us across that narrow lane, each with a small glass window, each with some shelf or frame inside holding a photo or a statuette or nothing at all. In the first window in the lower right corner, a soft yellow button of light grew, died, grew again like it was catching, then steadied to a small, honest flame. Immediately the mausoleum next to it flickered and caught. Then the third, the fourth, the fifth. They did not flare together. They moved like a procession underground, one by one from left to right. 5 small flames in 5 sealed houses turned the windows into warm eyes. The 6th never lit, and some part of me was grateful for its stubbornness, because everything all at once would have been too neat, and I would have told myself we were part of somebody's trick. Rafa made a sound in his throat that wasn't fear exactly. It was the sound our professor made when a set of test results came back, and something inside the numbers didn't obey what the books drew in straight lines. Carmen's hands shook. The pencil made a dark bruise on the paper where it rested. I felt the wetness on the tile before I saw it. I looked down at my shoes. A crescent of moisture had appeared near the toe, and then another, offset from it as if something stood very close and dripped from a calf to the floor. The air didn't change, and yet we were all colder. We might have left then. I think if the candles had just stayed lit and the air had stayed still, we would have told ourselves we had seen enough. But the footsteps started again, not behind us this time, but beside us, perfectly in step, as if a 4th person had joined the 3 of us and decided we were doing something together. Slap, breath, slap, breath, matching. If we stopped, it stopped. I tested it 3 times, quick, like I was trying to catch someone pressing an elevator button from across the lobby. I took a small step, then another, then stopped halfway through the 3rd. And the half sound from the 4th thing also choked off, as if it hated to be caught in the middle of a gesture. We backed toward the wider path. We didn't run. Something about running felt disrespectful in a very old way, like sprinting past pews. The flames in the windows didn't gutter with our movement. They stayed small and patient. Between two of the mausoleums, I saw a dark smear low on the tile and thought wax. But when I reached the spot, because I needed to touch something real, I needed the ugly chemical truth of it. My fingertip came away with water, not wax, and my skin smelled faintly of rain that hadn't fallen. We reached the statue of the weeping woman while the hour hand wheeled toward midnight. 53 minutes, Carmen wrote. 7 to go. It felt important to finish exactly what we'd promised. As if failing the hour would mean we had asked for something and then refused to accept its answer. Around us, the city continued. A distant engine hissed. Somewhere a cart bumped a curb. The hospital elevator must have chimed because we heard a small bell and then a nurse's voice in a stairwell. A brief echo that comforted me more than any prayer has. The air inside Belen had changed, though. It felt full and alert. Even the mosquitoes waited. At 11:56, the light over the gate hummed louder for a second, the way fluorescent bulbs sometimes do when they remember themselves. We were 4 people by then. That's what it felt like, even though we would never say it. The fourth's breath had a rhythm that made my own lungs adjust, which is not something I'd recommend noticing if you like sleeping. We stood in the center again, and Carmen laced her fingers with mine and Rafa's the way kids do in school when they have to cross the street. We looked toward the rows where we had seen the candles. Nothing moved. The flames were still awake in at least 2 windows, maybe 3, a small congregation. I'm embarrassed to write this, but I nodded toward them like you nod at a neighbor who has seen you cry once in an elevator. That tiny social reflex spilled out of the part of me that wanted to make this night a set of manners. The 4th set of steps took 1 step forward without us. A single wet slap ahead of our shared center. We did not follow. It took another. Then it stopped. Silence in Belen isn't silence. It's the drip 2 streets away. The wire singing a high note you only hear when you think about it. The hospital's constant low machine breath. But it was a shaped silence all the same. Like a hand around a candle to keep it from going out. I tightened my fingers in Carmen's and Rafa's. They squeezed back. I thought not for the first time of all the names we had read that night. How many bones lay arranged in the patient way, bones have beneath the stone. I thought of the hospital behind us and how many will be named soon, because that's the plain arithmetic of time. I felt that 4th breath change. Not warmer, not colder, more intent. And then the gate light buzzed into a softer tone and cleared its throat. The hour turned. Our phones marked midnight with the same generic chime we had ignored 1,000 times in kitchens and buses. Don Javier called from the entrance in a normal voice that sounded wrong here. Chico's, yeah. Time. His silhouette made a new angle through the cypresses, and the sound of his boots checked every fear in the lane like a nurse counting sponges. The 4th steps did not follow us to the gate. They stayed where they were, or they never were. The candles remained small and definite for as long as I could still see the windows. And then the angle of path and statue and tree took them from me, and with them a pressure I had not realized I was holding off with the muscles of my shoulders. We thanked Javier like we'd been rescued from an elevator, and not from anything that shouldn't need rescue. He frowned at the wet places our shoes had made just inside the gate. He looked up at the sky. It didn't rain, he said, puzzled, and rubbed his thumb against his index finger like he'd felt a drop that wasn't there. We didn't explain. He wouldn't have believed, or worse, he would have believed and added it to his inner list of things to avoid thinking about. He locked the gate behind us, and the clank of the chain felt like a lid set on something just starting to boil. We got on our bikes. The street felt asleep. The tires dragged slightly like they were on gum. None of us said it until we turned onto the road that runs along the hospital. And then Rafa asked without looking at me, "Did we all hear it?" "Yes," Carmen said. "We all heard it and saw it," I said. "The lights." We rode to the 24-hour place near the rotunda and ordered sweet coffee that tastes like if sugar could be steamed. The waiter didn't ask why we were damp up to our ankles. Why would he? People come in damp all the time in this city, even when rain forgets us. We chose a table under a picture of the cathedral printed on cheap vinyl that caught the light from the fan and made little circles of glare slide across the towers. We didn't say much. Every time the door opened, I listened for that sound. It didn't come. We paid, tipped too much like we always do after we've asked the city for something and gotten it without paying properly, and walked back out to our bikes. My front tire had a yellow smear on the rim that wouldn't come off on my thumbnail. Candle wax, I told myself. Some kid's candle from some altar we passed earlier. I didn't want to notice how it was only on my bike, not theirs. I have tried to be attentive to the days since. I've checked the cemetery from the street on my way to class because it's easy to explain why you're looking at a cemetery when you're carrying textbooks. I've asked around quietly. No, nobody put candles in the sealed vaults for a tour. No, there aren't remote control lights installed. The guides are proud of their theater, but they don't go that far. And there are rules and religious sensibilities and practicalities like, how would you even do it? I don't insist we saw anything other than what we saw. 5 small flames, 1 set of bare, wet steps. 2 nights later, I woke to the feeling that my sheets had been folded in a different way than I had folded them. Not tucked tighter, not looser. Changed. I lay there listening and realized the room had its own air now, held like the cemetery holds its air. I sat up and touched the floor. My fingers slid for a second. In the morning, there were faint arcs near the foot of my bed, the way a foot leaves a print if it steps out of a shower and pauses 2 beats before reaching for a towel. I told myself it was me because sometimes we can't own our sleep. I wiped them with a towel that smelled of the hospital's laundry soap because that is how the world mends itself to me when I'm afraid. We still pass Belen. I still nod at the angels with the chipped noses and the tiles that always look like they grew out of water. Carmen keeps the notepad with a tight rubber band. She added 1 final line under our time. Left at 00, 4th remained. Rafa bought us coffees for a week anyway, because he said rules are sometimes seals you break in order to name what you owe. He jokes more now. It's a way to loosen the door if the room has no windows. But he doesn't walk on the tile paths when we go to the hospital anymore. He keeps to the curb, like he's tracing something on the ground that nobody else can see. I told the first year we never slept there, and that nobody should try. She laughed the way I did when I was her, and her hair was just as long and her hours felt like they could be stretched around anything she wanted to fit inside. So what did you see? She asked. I told her a version like people tell in daylight to make each other feel brave. Then I told her the thing I wish someone had told me, that sometimes an hour is a door, and you think you are the one who opens it and closes it because you brought the key of your name and your 3 beats of courage. But the hinges have their own memory. They remember how they moved for someone before you, and they remember the weight of footsteps coming down the hall, and they remember a procession you didn't schedule. If you're lucky, they only remember you enough to mark your shoes while you stand there and measure your own pulse. At home, sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth with the fan on because the bathroom refuses to let go of its steam, the mirror fogs in an oval where a face would be, and then it clears. There's no message, no shapes, just the insistence of a breath that isn't mine, rising and falling on a rhythm that teaches my lungs the measure. If I stop breathing, it stops. If I start again, it is there, gentle, patient, keeping pace. I tell myself humidity can do tricks and that tile is only tile, glass only glass, hands only hands. I tell myself this until the lights go out behind my building on a quiet, thunderless night. And downstairs, the neighbor walks across his kitchen with wet feet from the shower, leaving prints that fade in the heat like small yellow candles going out one by one. And I count 3, then 4, and then I hold still to see whether the 4th will stop with me. It always does, for now. I've typed and erased this a dozen times, so I'm just going to say it the way it happened and let you decide what to do with it. I was in Kolkata for a sponsored series on historic places. Street food, tram rides, old neighborhoods that turn to lace at the edges when the monsoon air sticks to them. I'm a small travel blogger. Nothing fancy, but I take my work seriously. My grandfather was born in this city and used to tell me bedtime stories about mango trees and a cemetery where the stones leaned like tired people. He died 3 years ago, only he called me Mishti, no one else. I don't use it online. I don't use it in real life. I barely let myself think it, because it makes my chest feel hollow. On my 3rd day, I walked to South Park Street Cemetery just before it opened. The traffic had that soft morning patience. Men hosed the fronts of sweet shops. A woman in a blue sari pushed down incense sticks in the dirt and the smoke went sideways. Crows hopped on the low wall outside the gate like they were lining up to be counted. The guard on duty, his name tag said Mukherjee, propped the door open with a stone and yawned in my face, then grinned and took my 50 rupees for the photography fee. We signed a big register book with straight lines in it. He underlined the date and slid it across to me with an old fountain pen that left a bruise of ink on my finger. "Tripod?" he asked. "No tripod," I said. "Just handheld, I promise." He wagged a finger with mock sternness and then pointed at a laminated sheet taped inside the gate. "No food. No smoking. No climbing. No rubbing chalk or charcoal on stones." He added his own rule. "No touching history," and I nodded. Inside it was cooler, like stepping into a different time because of the banyans gloving the place. The paths were brick and a little eaten away, the edges thick with ferns and narrow leaves that felt damp when my jeans brushed them. The air smelled like wet soil and dust. Even the sound of traffic outside seemed suddenly far away, like a radio in another apartment. I started with wide shots, then the details that always do well online. A mossy angel's nose chipped off, a cracked urn with a tiny fig leaf pushing up, the laces of a stone boot someone long gone had paid good money to bring into the world. My camera is a mirrorless with a fixed 35mm, nothing heavy. I shoot RAW and JPEG because sponsors sometimes want both. I pay attention to histogram and exposure like a nerd because it saves me headaches later. There are small signs with numbers and brief notes about who's buried where. Merchants, soldiers, a poet or two. Some names are still clear. Others look like the language itself has peeled away, leaving a topography of absence. I framed a shot of an obelisk that leaned a little, a crack running down it like lightning caught in stone, and took a burst because the light was complicated under the leaves. When I checked my playback for sharpness, I frowned. In the first frame, the inscription looked normal. "Here lies," and then a long British name with too many consonants. In the second frame, the name was paler only a little. By the seventh, the letters had fainted until the stone read like it had been half erased by fog. I figured it was my angle or a passing cloud. I took a second burst, careful to keep my grip steady, breathing the way you do when you pretend to be a tripod. Same result. I turned the dial to play through both sequences. In the first, normal. In the second, the name seemed to bleach out, stroke by stroke from middle to sides. I laughed because anomalies are content gold. I even said weird out loud to nobody because talking to myself is a bad habit in new places. A man in a beige shirt with a bunch of keys hanging from his belt watched me from the shadow of a cross. He'd materialized like caretakers do, with that patient authority of people who manage grounds. He asked if I needed help finding famous graves. His name was Duda. He had polite eyes and a voice that didn't compete with the trees. "Actually," I held up the screen, "this keeps happening. Maybe my camera?" He squinted, then looked at the stone, then back at the camera. "Sometimes the lichen plays tricks," he offered. "Green hides gray. But it's losing letters," I said. "In the same shot sequence." "Maybe the cloud is soft," he said, and his smile wasn't unkind. "You photographers like mystery. It helps you tell stories." A boy in a school uniform ran past the gate with a friend chasing a paper ball, and their laughter cut neatly across the quiet. I let it go and kept walking. At the far end, near the heavier monuments, I found a low table-like tomb the color of old ash. The epitaph was faint in the way that makes you lean forward, which I did, tightening my strap so the camera didn't swing into the stone. "Sacred to the memory of..." and again, names, dates. I took a photo, looked, took another. In the second image, not only were letters fading, but the ones that remained seemed to drift like metal filings pulling toward a magnet under paper. I watched as they felt their way into a new arrangement. A slow whiteout from the edges left just a few letters. M-I-S-H-T-I. I blinked so hard I got a floater. I don't write Mishti anywhere. It's nowhere. It's not in my email, not on my blog, not in comments. I didn't even say it when the airline clerk asked if I had a middle name. That name lives only in my memory, where my grandfather kept it like a toy in his pocket. I took a third photo to prove to myself I was being ridiculous, and the screen showed something new. Those letters arranged a second line, as if a hesitant hand had found an old alphabet and written awkwardly with light. "Come back." The sound in my ears was my own breath now, going too high. I took another, and the letters had snapped back, each to its original place on the person's name, Innocent. The stone, when I touched it, was rough and cool. I made myself photograph other things. A thin cat stalked the fern beds. A lizard lifted its small hands and ran like a sewing needle. A woman in red dupatta moved through the paths, picking leaves into a bag for some reason of her own. I kept shooting because that's what I do when something scares me. My body repeats its tasks until my mind catches up. When I finally left, I sat on the low wall outside and drank a glass of too sweet tea from a stall. I scrolled the shots on my phone from the camera's card. In the thumbnails, they looked normal. When I tapped, the letters drifted. The boy at the stall turned up his radio and a jingle for cooking oil cheered at me with perfect irrelevance. Traffic had gotten louder. The city kept living the same way, even though my hands were shaking. I told myself it was fatigue, humidity, suggestion. I texted my friend Ananya, who lives in the city, and asked if she'd meet me for lunch on Park Street at Peter Cat. She sent back a 3-dish string of emojis and, 1 hour? I said yes. On the way, I ducked into a small electronics shop and bought a fresh SD card. The clerk cut the blister pack with a grandfatherly pocket knife. The ceiling fan above us hesitated on one blade, the way they do when the power threatens to blink. I put the new card in and took a test shot of the shop's dusty shelf of cables. When I looked, the cables were just cables. Lunch was a cool cave. The waiter carried sizzlers like passports through the dark. Ananya is the kind of friend who occupies a room quickly, not with noise but presence. She hugged me and took my camera, scrolling without asking because that's our style. By then I had done the thing I pretend I hate but always do. I had named what I saw in my head. Not glitch, not lens issue, and not prank, I had called it him. I didn't tell her that yet. I've shot in that cemetery, she said, sliding through the frames with her thumbnail. It's like a theater for ghosts, nah? But these are good. The light is nice. That tomb, she stopped. She pinched to zoom. Her face changed in that tiny way, as if someone tightened a thread behind her ear. I don't like this. Which part? This. She held the camera between both hands as if to steady it, though it wasn't moving. The screen showed the word, my word, Mishti. I felt embarrassed. Shame is such a stupid reaction to fear, but it's the one my body likes. It's probably coincidence, I said. Half the names there are broken. Weird letter combos appear. Maybe, she said. But it's your word. Only your word. I didn't tell you that, I said. You didn't have to. I used to come to your house, she said. Like we were in school again and my grandfather could be expected to walk in any minute with a plate of cut guavas. He called you that when he thought you were asleep. I had forgotten. Or I had filed it somewhere I didn't open often. The waiter slid a basket of naan between us like a stagehand adding a prop. Come with me tomorrow? I asked. At dawn. I want to go back and check. She looked at me for a long moment. Dawn is when stupid things feel brave, she said. Okay. When I got back to my guest house, I transferred the files. I'm paranoid, so I keep 2 hard drives and a cloud backup that I upload at night. My room had high ceilings and a fan that made more noise than wind. In the hallway outside, someone practiced a scale on a harmonium. Slow and patient, breath in, breath out. I opened the first set of photos. The names were intact. I scrolled. They blurred. My editing software showed the raw files behaving the same way, which made no sense. Raw is data before the camera pretends to be helpful. I checked metadata to comfort myself. Times, f-stops, ISO. And then I saw it. In the file names, where the camera had mechanically counted up, numbers had skipped. 1176, 1177, 1180. The missing frames sat briefly in the folder and then, as if a cursor erased them, they winked out. I hadn't selected anything. I hadn't touched my trackpad. I slept badly with my bag against my chest like a child, which is ridiculous but which felt necessary. Twice I woke to crows arguing in the mango outside and once to the electricity cutting out and the fan winding down like a sigh. In the dark of the in-between, someone in the hallway coughed 3 times and on the 3rd cough I recognized it like a scent. It wasn't that it was his cough. It was that the shape of it fit exactly into the hollow his absence makes inside me. We met at the gate at 5:15. The watchman was the night one now. A different man with a green sweater draped over his shoulders. He made us sign again. He tried to make a joke that didn't land. The city sounded tinny at that hour. The first taxi horns, the first tea kettles, crows already awake because that's their job. The sky was a soft bruise. We walked straight to the stone table without talking much. The path sucked at our sneakers. Dew made the ferns lean and disclose their serrated edges. At the tomb, we stopped. Ananya grabbed my arm before I even saw it fully, like she was afraid I'd get pulled forward. Along the flanks where lichen usually hides, vines had laid themselves over the stone since yesterday. Not the loose thread of a creeper, but deliberate strands glossed with dew. They curled to make shapes, numbers. I know how pareidolia works. I refuse it on principle. But the vines weren't asking me to invent. They'd arranged themselves into clear digits, neat as if written on school slate. 1410-2025. Ananya said it first because I couldn't. Next Tuesday, I tasted metal, which is what my body serves me when panic cooks. It's a date, I said, like an idiot reciting what the eyes show. Maybe the gardener snipped this, she said, reaching out, then stopping inches away. No, why would he do that? It's for me, I said, without meaning to say it. The letters yesterday. Then look. My hand shook as I lifted the camera, took a photo. The playback showed the numbers brighter than real, as if chalked. Then in the next frame, a second line appeared under the date without any vine to justify it. A blossoming of pale on stone. 4:17 a.m. Ananya's mouth made a line so white it looked like another inscription. We should go, she said. We should go now. I took a second shot and something else appeared and I heard my own small sound. Under the time, my name again. The nickname. Only this time it wasn't printed clean. It was a little shakier, as if written by a hand I knew by the way it fumbles pen caps. He had taught me my letters by drawing them in flour on the kitchen table. He'd trace and I'd wipe away with my palm and laugh. Memory is a trickster, yes, but my body recognized something my head didn't want. Ananya was tugging my sleeve. We left. At the gate, Mr. Duda stood with the new watchman, their heads together, and they broke apart when we approached like kids who'd been caught. Early birds, Duda said softly. His keys rattled. The watchman looked at me as if he knew something about my day that I didn't. I could tell they had been talking about us, but also about other things, the city, salaries, their backs. On Park Street, things were waking properly now. A constable on a bike asked a tea stall for special, which means stronger. A line formed for eggs under a sign with a chicken in a crown. A dog slept in the gutter like a poured cloth. We sat on the curb and pretended to want breakfast. I told Ananya what I hadn't yet said, that my grandfather's voice used to fold my name like a sweet in the corner of his mouth. That he'd described this cemetery in detail, though. To my knowledge, he'd been gone from the city before my mother was born. That when he died, he wasn't the kind of man who would promise to come back. He'd been clear-eyed. He'd told me things end. The end is part of the story, so why this? She asked. Why now? Maybe I wouldn't hear earlier, I said. Maybe I needed the excuse of work to come here. You'll ignore a date carved by vines? She said. No offense, but you are not the ignoring type. I'll photograph it, I said. That's all I know how to do. The next days were practical. I finished other shoots. I sent drafts to 2 brands. I ate something spicy enough to make my nose run, and got lost on College Street among stalls of books that smelled the same as the ones in my grandfather's study. I filmed trams and the way people casually hang off them like leaves on branches. At night I lay in my bed and waited for the power to blink, for the fan to slow and the city to hold its breath, for footsteps to stop at my door and keep going. I told myself I was not preparing for anything. The date approached anyway, like a train that doesn't care what you're doing in your compartment. On Monday evening, I called my mother and didn't say why. I asked about the dish he used to make, the egg curry that turned our plates yellow. I asked if he ever talked about Kolkata. She said he hated nostalgia. She said he kept his city in a pocket he didn't pull out. She said the only time she saw him cry was over a broken harmonium key. I could hear her trying not to ask if I was okay. I told her I was, which was not a lie in the way that feelings bend into shapes to fit a sentence. At 3:40 on Tuesday morning, I was already awake. The city wasn't silent. Kolkata is never silent. Someone somewhere fed a baby. A taxi leaned on its horn like a yawn. A couple argued softly and then fell asleep mid-air. I left the guest house like a thief, but my bag was only my camera. A spare battery, a notebook I'd started years ago and always meant to fill. Ananya didn't come with me. She had texted at midnight that she wasn't brave or stupid enough, and then 3 crying laughing emojis and call me after. I said I would. I meant it. Mukherjee, the morning guard, glanced up, surprised to see me so early. He didn't ask questions, just opened the gate and my hands shook again when I signed. The pen smeared my name so it looked like a wet arrow. I walked in. The cemetery held its cold, careful breath. Dew laid its miles of small silver over everything. The cat from before blinked at me and turned her back like a queen. I could hear my footsteps and, I swear, the quieter footsteps my mind made to follow me. When I reached the tomb, the vines were not the same. They had thickened just a little. The numbers were there. The time underneath had darkened to a green so deep it looked carved. The seconds on my watch flowed with an obscene carelessness. 4:13, 4:14. I set the camera bag on the ground and wiped my palms on my jeans. I took one photo. The stone looked like a stone. Another. The word formed, Mishti. It was lighter than the real world by a shade that deleted any doubt. Another. The date shimmered, then settled. 4:16. The city outside lifted its volume like a hand. I heard a cough behind me. 3 beats. I didn't turn around because in that second, I knew if I did I'd see something I would never be able to reconcile with the daylight version of my life. The cough held an old tobacco note. If a sound can have a posture, it stood the way he stood at windows. Don't, I said, to whom I don't know. Maybe to the future that had chosen a wristwatch moment to announce itself. Maybe to the city for being alive while I was this afraid. A hand touched the back of my head. No, let me be precise. A pressure passed over my hair like a breeze with intention. Not cold, not warm, just present. The taste of metal in my mouth turned to salt. The tomb, which had been a thing, became a place. I raised the camera without turning and shot blind over my shoulder the way I once did at a parade. The photo chimed into being. I made myself look. The path behind me was empty in the image except for a small white fog that could have been breath, could have been my own. I took another. Empty, except for a darker curve where a shoulder might be. At 4:17, a tram bell rang outside the wall in a single neat circle. The vines on the tomb trembled, or maybe I did. The letters on the stone brightened so intensely on my screen that for a second the word was the only thing in the world. Mishti. Then underneath, letters that rearranged themselves slowly as if they were tired and had to be coaxed. Go home. The cemetery didn't change. The angle of the morning light didn't shift to drama. 2 crows lifted from a chiseled urn like someone had thrown them. The air realized it should warm up soon. My body unclenched by increments I didn't control. I put the camera down. I put my hand on the stone. I whispered, okay, and my own. Voice answered me with okay, and I stood there until a gardener knocked dirt from his spade very deliberately as if to remind me the living have work. I walked back to the gate. Mr. Dutta was at the far end of the path. He raised his hand halfway and then lowered it. Early photography, he said, but his eyes were on my face and I think he saw something he would never get a name for. At the register, Mukherjee pointed to the column where I'd signed 2 days earlier. He chuckled in a way that wasn't unfriendly. Your handwriting, he said. It changes with the weather, madam. My signature from that day was the same, but the date beside it looked rubbed at. The 7 had turned to a 1 and back again like a coin catching light. I smiled the way people smile at babies when they have no idea what the baby wants. I left a second 50 on his desk because that felt like something a person who had a real problem would do. I didn't go back to the guest house. I walked the long way to the river. I watched people doing their morning routines with the holiness of habit. I sat on a bench that had a broken slat and texted Ananya, I'm okay. She called me immediately. When she asked what happened, I tried to tell her, but the words tangled. She said to come to her office later and sit by her desk while she answered emails. She said if I wanted tea, she would bring me tea. She said my grandfather's nickname for me was ridiculous and sweet, and that I didn't have to carry it like a secret anymore. When I finally opened the camera roll in the full sun, the letters were not doing their trick. The photos were just photos. The vines were just vines shaped like numbers if you wanted them to be. In 2 of the frames, though, I saw something I had missed in the dark. In the blur at the edge of the obelisk shot, a shape like a child's chalk drawing of a man, coat, shoulder, the ghost of a profile. When I zoomed further, the pixels broke into a city of squares as they do, and I could have told myself anything. I didn't. I could end this here with something tidy, like a lesson about grief wearing weather the way trees wear light, but that would be lying by wisdom. So I'll say instead what is still happening. On my last night in the city, the power didn't cut, but the fan slowed anyway, like a thought figuring itself out. In the hall, someone ran a harmonium scale again, then stopped on a note I recognized from my grandfather's bad ear. I started to hum the next note and my voice completed his, which made me laugh and cry at the same time like a person I wouldn't want to sit next to on a train. Back home, I posted other parts of the trip. I wrote about trams and suites and how the rain here speaks different accents depending on the street. I didn't post the cemetery story. I told myself I was saving it for later, for a pitch for a long-form piece. The truth is, I didn't want strangers to tell me what my own eyes did. But my drafts folder has a thing now, a set of photos marked private, with the metadata untouched except for one weirdness I can't fix. Every time I open that folder, a new thumbnail appears and then vanishes. When I click fast enough, sometimes I catch it. It's a crop of stone, high contrast, unhelpful. The file name increments where there should be no more numbers. I rename it and it changes back. I drag it into a different folder and the original returns clean as a tide. And last week, when I woke at 4:17 without an alarm, my phone had a reminder I didn't set. It was for the day of my grandfather's birthday, which I never remember because I always remember the silly name day instead, when he gave me ladus for no reason. The reminder just said in a calm system font, "Go home." I deleted it. The next morning, it was back. I deleted it again. Today, I woke to no reminder at all and felt relief the way you feel air before a storm. Heavy and generous. I checked my photos. Nothing new, nothing missing. But this evening, I poured rice into a bowl and a single grain was dark, not spoiled, just printed like a letter. I took it to the window. It was the curved part of a Bengali consonant I recognize only because it's in my last name. I lost it between my fingertips because I'm clumsy and because my palms had started to sweat. I stood there like an idiot while crows negotiated the sunset on the telephone wires, and a neighbor's pressure cooker hissed and hissed like someone teaching me to breathe. I could tell you that I'm going to ignore this, that I'll post my cafe reels and my helpful packing lists and pretend the cemetery is only a place where history naps. But I've bought a ticket, the cheaper one, the kind with too many stops. It leaves next month before the air turns cool enough to let you pretend the city is gentle. I wrote to Ananya and she sent back a single "okay," the way we used to say it when we were 12 and had just dared each other to do something that would guarantee a scolding. If you're expecting the kind of ending where I tell you what I'll find, I can't. I only know this. Sometimes names were carved in stone to last. Sometimes they were carved so that later, when they faded, whoever needed to read the new writing would notice. I don't know if the message is for me or through me. I don't know if going back is going home or if going home is leaving it. I only know that at 4:17 some mornings, the ceiling fan hesitates and the whole room holds its key, waiting for someone to play the next note. And when the air moves again, just a little, it's in the direction of Park Street. I don't care if anyone believes me. I just need to put this out there before I convince myself it didn't happen. I'm a delivery rider in Cairo. One of those guys you see weaving through traffic with a big insulated box strapped to the back of a scooter and a helmet we forget to clip. It's not glamorous, but it pays for my sister's pharmacy classes, and for my share of the rent on a thin-walled apartment where the elevator tries to kill us every other week. Nights are better for deliveries because the streets open up a little. And if you're brave, you can take shortcuts. Sometimes that means cutting across El Arafa, the city of the dead where families live among mausoleums and the alleys run like a chessboard between tombs. People think it's creepy. Honestly, it's usually the quietest part of my route. At least it was. The night started normal enough. My friend Hatem at the Kahwa on Sharia Al-Imam was filling tiny cups with sugary tea and yelling at a football match on the TV. He called me captain, like he always does, and slid me a cup before I could pay. Ali, another writer I sometimes tail for company, was fiddling with the cracked screen of his phone. "You going south?" he asked. I shrugged. "Wherever the app blinks." He snorted and said I should skip Carafa because of some roadwork near Bab al-Nasser, but Ali has a standing superstition about the cemetery and will invent any reason not to go through it. I've heard all his stories. I took another sip of tea and showed him the map. The little blue dot that is my life was pulsing right on the edge of the city of the dead. 2 drops in Tura, then Mahdi, I said. The long way is a half hour in traffic. Or 10 minutes through the houses of God, Hatem added dryly. And we all laughed like brave men in a joke we didn't own. My sister Miriam texted me as I strapped on my helmet. "Don't be late," she wrote. "Your landlord came by again." I sent a thumbs up and a photo of the moon above the minaret down the block. The air smelled like diesel and bread. The match on the TV roared. A microbus wheezed past with men hanging from the door like ornaments. I was thinking about nothing when I rolled onto Salah Salem, dipped under the overpass and slid into the familiar shadow at the edge of El Arafa. If you don't know it, the city of the dead isn't empty. There are cats everywhere and kids playing football against marble walls and men in galabias smoking on stoops. Some tombs have satellite dishes, laundry lines, potted plants. You ride quietly. People nod to you like any neighborhood. I clicked my headlight down a notch so it wouldn't beam right into courtyards, and the scooter's hum turned into a low purr. I've done this shortcut 100 times. My brain switches to a different speed. Watch for loose tiles, don't spook the sleeping dog. Keep the pace steady because someone might step out from behind a wall. When it happened, it was so small that if I'd blinked wrong, I might have missed it. I came around a narrow bend where an old acacia leans over the path. A man stood there, maybe 60, maybe older, leaning on a walking stick with the curved handle. He wore one of those washed-out suits my father's generation kept for weddings and burials, too big at the shoulders and too shiny at the elbows. His face wasn't anything dramatic. Gentle mustache, soft cheeks, tired eyes. He lifted his free hand, palm up, the universal sign for wait. I braked hard enough to squeal and nearly put my foot in a shallow drain. The man smiled like I'd done him a favor. "Captain," he said, "people call me that even when I'm on a scooter. Forgive me. Do you know where Sharia Al-Fadil used to be? Near the old bakery?" I knew almost every street in this maze by feel, but Sharia Al-Fadil didn't ring anything. "Let me check," I said, because that's what I do when a customer changes their mind or a street isn't labeled. I opened the app, zoomed out, zoomed in, fighting the lag where the map looks like it's taking a nap. "Al-Fadil?" I repeated so the search could catch a sound. "Al-Fadil, yes," he said, patient. Before they moved the wall, I tried Google. I tried repeating the word to myself to see if it meant something older people say. When I looked up to confirm the spelling, he was gone. There was no place for him to go. The alley ran straight for maybe 20 meters, then kinked to the left. On the right were tomb facades, low walls with ironwork, a couple of open gates. On the left, a long expanse of old brick with the top row missing in places so that you could peek in and see a courtyard. No doors within reach. No recessed entry where a man could have slipped. No footfalls, no click of a walking stick. Just the old acacia overhead shedding dry leaves with the soft hiss that usually relaxes me. I left the scooter idling and stepped off like a fool. "Amo?" I called. "Uncle. Al-Fadil? Do you mean El-Fadl?" My voice hit the brick and flattened. A kid's radio far back in the alleys warbled a love song. Two cats wrestled across the path, then broke apart and stared at me with that all-knowing cat look. Somewhere a light buzzed and flickered as if a tube was dying. I stood there like a scarecrow with my helmet strap tapping my chin in the breeze. I knew what Ali would say, you see? You tempt places and places tempt back. When I turned back to the scooter, the map in my hand had rotated 90 degrees by itself. My blue dot had shifted. It wasn't just lag. The app had redrawn the path. The street name I'd been on had vanished and a thin gray line appeared where there hadn't been one. A tiny pathway sliding between two courtyards and then hooking left. I stared at the screen, then at the real alley. A low wall now stood where I swore there had been a gap, a waist-high wall topped with a cement beam the width of my palm, the kind you hop if you're late. On the other side of that wall, exactly where the app was saying to go, was a family tomb I'd seen before. It always struck me because the facade has no traditional door. Instead, there's a rectangular opening, shoulder wide, no hinge marks, no lock, just an empty rectangle that leads into a room that always smells like cool dust. People called it a doorless room, like it had decided long ago to be done with coming and going. I'd never been inside. No one goes into a tomb they're not visiting. It's not fear exactly. It's manners. The app, my livelihood, my guide, decided my shortest route skimmed right past that opening. I laughed out loud because sometimes the maps do this, telling you to drive across the Nile or straight through a mosque courtyard. I pinched to zoom out. The path stayed where it was, a gray whisper, then snapped back in. The screen pulsed blue, pulse, slow and steady. My heart translated into light. That was when I heard the tapping. At first I thought it was my side stand bouncing against the scooter frame. Tap, tap, tap. I kicked it with my heel. The tapping continued, quiet and perfect in its rhythm. I held my breath and it paused, then resumed, tapping the seconds of a body I realized was my own. Tap when my chest swelled, tap when it fell. Every now and then I drink too much coffee and feel my pulse in my throat. This was like that, except it was outside me. Barely there, but inescapable, like a neighbor's spoon working a sugar glass. I told myself it was something loose. I killed the engine. The quiet is never absolute in the city of the dead. There's always a radio somewhere, a cough, a prayer whispered as someone closes a gate. But the sound around me thinned. Even the cats had stilled. Tap, tap, tap. The soft tapping was coming from the doorless room. I'm not a brave man. I'm a man on a scooter who gets annoyed when people pin their location wrong. But I'm also someone's brother and someone's son. And I have walked through cemeteries since I could stand because my father took us to visit family on Fridays with a bag of fava beans and a thermos of tea. He taught us to say salam when we passed the residence to lower our voices, to fix a stone if it was out of place. He made it ordinary. That's how I thought of it now, ordinary. An old building, an echo, some loose tile making a trick like a metronome. I'd be stupid to let my brain start a story that would scare me later. I stepped up to the low wall, swung my leg and dropped onto the other side. The tapping hushed like it had been embarrassed. I stayed dry-mouthed for a few heartbeats. The doorless opening was right in front of me. Inside, the low room lay in a wash of cool shadow, that particular smell of lime and old stone that makes your saliva thicken. When my eyes adjusted, I saw the plane of a slab, its corners chipped by time. A potted plant gone long ago, but leaving the ring of its pottery in a pale circle. On the wall, someone had brushed a verse in black paint. The ascenders faded so that each letter looked like it had slept and woken too early. Nothing was moving. Tap, 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 very soft. I tilted my head. The sound was coming from deep inside, maybe behind or beneath the slab. No wind blew. The air tasted like the inside of a cupboard. Salam alaikum, I said, because that's how the living should announce themselves among the dead. My voice went nowhere. I tried my flashlight, but it threw a circle that looked fake on the dust and made my own hand look like it belonged to someone else. I turned it off. The tapping matched me again, the exact tempo of my chest. I put my fingertips on my sternum like I could hold my beating and make it stop to test the sound. I squeezed. The world went bright at the edges for a second, and the tapping paused, then resumed with a new, slower beat that was not mine. I stepped back on instinct. Heel hitting the sandy floor with that sliding hiss tiles make when you're in a mosque and don't want to wake a prayer. The tapping was not cruel. It was not threatening. If anything, it was polite, 2 fingers on a door that didn't exist, tap, tap, tap. It made me think of the old man's voice when he asked for that street. Do you know where Sharia al-Fadil used to be? Before they moved the wall, I told myself, you are being ridiculous. There is a water pipe in the wall expanding and contracting. Someone is playing a trick. A kid dropped a ball behind the slab and it's hitting in the draft. I told myself maybe there is a pair of lovers behind the tomb having a secret meeting. I wanted it to be anything human, even if it made me a character in their story. The dumb captain who pokes his head inside and laughs it off. Who is there? I asked in Arabic, then in broken English, and then without language, just the question in my breath. The tapping changed. Not louder, just different. It skipped a beat the way the heart does when you're scared. That weird stutter that makes you cough. It skipped, tapped twice fast, paused, and then settled into a pattern I knew as well as my own pulse. Years ago, when our mother was in the hospital, they strapped a monitor to her and the machine made that chirp that is supposed to be comforting. You get used to the noise and hear the person in it, like their voice translated to a thing that cannot speak. This tapping was telling me something. It knew my rhythm. It had matched me, learned me. It stuttered again, and my chest stuttered with it as if my body couldn't decide who was leading. I did something that I'm not proud of. I set the scooter key on the wall outside the opening, visible, obvious, like a ridiculous offering to the idea that I was not trespassing, just pausing to adjust my map. I placed it evenly, right aligned with the corner because I get weird about straight lines when I'm nervous. Then I stepped closer and lowered myself to sit cross-legged just inside the threshold. I did not cross into the middle of the room. My father would have cuffed me if he were alive to see me sit my idiot self on a family's cold floor. I sat at the lip, where my shadow corded with the dark inside and the moonlight poured over my helmet. If you need directions, I said softly, tell me a sign. A whisper rose in the alley behind me, the kind of murmur a group makes when a joke lands. Footsteps a few. There's always someone. I turned to wave to show I wasn't stealing anything. The alley was empty. What I heard was my scooter cooling. Metal clicks when it goes from hot to warm. I had forgotten that sound because the tapping had stepped into every part of me, had stood in the doorway of my ears and said, "I am your visitor now." My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mariam again. Are you coming home or moving to Luxor?" I laughed out loud. The tapping stopped. For one long second, the room had no sound. It felt like listening to someone hold their breath on the other end of a phone call. Then the tapping started again, slower, deliberating. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Not a heartbeat now, knuckles, counting. My neck prickled and I started to feel stupid for sitting there. Too many stories had been poured into me over years at tables in this city. You can't unhear them, and they start to tell you back to yourself. I stood up. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I wanted to be kind to whatever this was, to let it keep its dignity. I placed my palm against the inside edge of the opening, the way you do the frame of a doorway when you're leaving a house you love. A quick press to leave your skin on the wood. The stone was cooler than the night. There was a faint vibration under it, a tick like a watch inside a pocket. Suddenly I pictured the old man's face again. The mustache, the soft eyes. He hadn't looked lost. He had looked like someone asking for a memory. Sharia al-Fadil used to be where he raised his hand to me. Maybe I had been standing in it. Maybe the walls moved. Cairo does that. Streets unmake and make themselves when the city has a mood. The tapping, the learned rhythm stuttered hard. 2 fast taps and a hush like a gasp. I almost apologized without knowing for what. I glanced back at my key on the wall outside, a little gleam in the alley light. My helmet strap ticked my chin. The air inside the room shifted just enough to thicken the dust smell. I could not see anyone. I could not hear breath. Yet the conviction came into my head not as a thought but as a rule: do not step farther. People who ignore rules in cemeteries don't get a story. They get warned by old women with brooms. They get shamed by polite men who ask them their father's name. They get steered out by boys with soccer balls. If something had asked me to come in, it would have been wrong to listen. I took my hand off the stone. "Al-Fadil," I said one last time to the room that had no door. "I'm sorry, I don't know it." The tapping impossibly softened to the edge of silence. It did not stop. It leaned away like someone walking backward into a courtyard, smiling to say, "Don't worry, I won't keep you." My chest found its own beat again, not quite steady. I stepped back over the low wall, my foot leaving a printed oval in the fine dust. Something about that mark made my stomach go light. You don't mark a floor like that and then pretend you weren't there. I scooped up my key and pocketed it without looking. The air outside felt thinner, like the city had inhaled too much and was holding it. I would like to say I rode straight out. I'd like to say I didn't look back. In truth, I started the scooter, let it idle, and turned once. The opening was dark, a rectangle. There was nothing to see. But as I watched, the weirdest, smallest change occurred. The edges trembled. Not the stone, my eyes. The pupils try to make sense of light like a cat's tail tells you the mood of the cat. For a fraction of a second, it looked like there was a veil just inside. A shimmer the thickness of heat on a road. It pressed inward, like the air was an eyelid closing over a sleeping face. And then it was gone, and so was the tapping. And the distant radio decided to be a radio again. I left the city of the dead like a man late for his own life. I took the long way after all, out toward the ring road and then down into Mahdi where the air smells different. I made my drops without remembering any of the faces, signed the screen, said thank you and good night and watch the bag please. Ali called me twice, but I let it ring out. I didn't want to hear him say I told you so, or worse, to say in that half-joking way he has, that I should take a moment to wash my hands before I go home. When he reached me a third time, I picked up and said, "I'm fine." He didn't ask what happened. He only said, "I dreamed something last week. Don't be angry," as if we had already been in a fight. By the time I got home, Mariam was asleep on the couch with her face in a pharmacology book that looked like it was trying to eat her. I covered her with a towel because everything else was in the wash and sat on the balcony smoking a cigarette I'd quit months ago. Cairo makes its own weather late at night. There's a wind that knows every alley. It touched my face with grit, and I thought of the doorless room and of that tiny polite sound. Tap, tap, tap. I tapped ash and told myself stories. Pipe expansion, a lizard, a boy teasing, an old man confusing names. I made a wall of explanations and sat behind it like a child. Around 3, I went to bed and dreamed I was late for class. In the dream, there was no class, no school, just a hallway with 10,000 doorways and not a single door. The next afternoon, I went back to the kahwa for tea. Hadam squinted at me, then handed me a pastry with the tea like he'd decided I needed sugar for some reason. "You took carafa?" he asked gently, which was his way of saying he knew I had. Before I could answer, an older man at the next table leaned over. He was one of those neighborhood elders who always wears a sweater vest even when it's hot and knows the gossip about buses. "You're the captain," he said. "Do you ever go by the Sabain vaults?" I nodded. "You know, the one with the room with no door?" I nodded again, not trusting my face. He smiled faintly. "That one is from before the street, you know." They drew the street around it. Then they redrew it. Streets move. He made a little wave with his hand as if coaxing a fish. People forget names, Al-Fadil, Al-Fadl, Al-Fadil. It doesn't matter what we call it. Some places keep their own names. I must have looked strange because Ali walked in then and sat without taking off his helmet. "Tell him your dream," Haytham said, as if the three of them had rehearsed this. Ali rolled his eyes, then said, "A week ago I dreamed I was on Salah Salem and a man asked me if I knew where the bakery from his childhood had gone. He was on the wrong side of the road. I told him to wait. I woke up with my heart doing this." He tapped the table. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It wasn't exactly the rhythm I'd heard, but it was close enough that my mouth went dry. "I hate that place," he said, meaning the city of the dead, and the way he said it wasn't disrespectful. It was as if he hated a part of himself he couldn't ignore. I could have left it there. Life was already crowding in. Rent, roots, Miriam's exam. But I'm writing this because the tapping didn't stop when I left. It hasn't followed me in sound. It followed in pacing. I went to the bank and the line of customers in front of me shuffled forward exactly when my heart nudged. I stirred sugar into my tea and the spoon clinked the glass on the same beat. I walked up our stairwell and put my key to the lock, and the metal ticked on the cylinder with a tiny lag, like someone tapping from the other side, synchronizing and then falling half a second behind. Once I stopped on the sidewalk because I thought I heard a cart coming up behind me. The clatter a wheel makes when it hits the same loose stone every time. There was no cart. Just a little delay between my footstep and the cities. I haven't gone back through El Arafa at night since. In daylight once I did pass by the part with the old acacia. The air was different. The smell of bread and laundry and gasoline made a warm noise that wrapped everything. Men were patching a wall with gray cement mixed on a piece of cardboard. A boy banged a ball off a slab until a woman scolded him. I slowed the scooter and put my foot down and didn't let myself look. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the opening to the doorless room. It looked smaller by day. Inside, the shadow ran like ink. An old plant pot had been set upright near the threshold, and someone had placed 3 white stones inside like eggs. I felt an ache I didn't have a word for. At night, when the apartment is quiet and the refrigerator's motor takes a breath, I hear, no, not the sound. I feel the beat of another place counting its seconds near me. It's not trying to frighten me. It's making sure I know that our maps are not the only maps and that sometimes we step onto a street we didn't know had been moved, and someone asks us to point to home. When I fall asleep, I see a suit jacket that never quite fit, and a hand lifted palm up in the gentlest interruption. Once, 2 nights ago, when the power cut and the whole building exhaled, the darkness put a single soft tap into our living room like a knuckle on glass. It matched me, then it didn't. My heart stuttered, then steadied. The sound did the opposite, as if the 2 of us were taking turns. I lay there counting, unsure which of us was behind the wall. If I get another route that way, I'll politely take the long road because I have learned something I don't want to forget. Not every doorway needs a door, not every room needs a visitor, and not every question expects an answer. But sometimes, when the city is very still, a person you've never met asks you for a street that no longer exists, and the world adjusts itself just enough to let him pass. I think he did. I hope he did. When my chest pauses and the tapping continues, I imagine that's him finishing the count for both of us. And if you find yourself in Cairo and your map redraws the shortest path through the city of the dead, and you see a low wall where you swear there was none, and from inside a shadow a soft tapping keeps time with your breath until it doesn't, do the decent thing. Say salam. Listen. Then go on your way, leaving your mark in the dust like a signature the wind will take, and try not to wonder which of you is the one standing just inside. polite as a guest who will never cross the threshold. I'm posting this because I keep waking up humming a tune I shouldn't know. And last night my roommate said I was moving my lips like I was repeating lines in a language I don't speak. I tried to laugh it off, but I had my phone on the desk, and the voice memo app caught 30 seconds of breathy singing. A thin, lilting melody like when you run a wet finger around the rim of a glass. I've played it maybe 20 times in the last hour. The weirdest part isn't the sound, it's the little knock at the end, like the soft thud of a wooden handle hitting wood. I know where I heard it first. I just hoped writing this might get it out of me. I was backpacking in northern Romania a few summers ago, doing the route my friend Mags called the probably okay plan. Trains if I could, buses when I had to, and walking if everything else failed. I'm not a thrill seeker. I like daylight, museums, cheap soup, and beds that don't smell like other people. We'd been in Cluj-Siget, those places with names that felt good in your mouth even if you were saying them wrong. We'd been messaging a guy we met in Krakow who said, if you go that far north, stop by Sapanca, Mary Cemetery. You'll love it. He sent a photo of a bright blue cross carved with a man holding an axe, and a poem in Romanian he claimed was a joke about the guy drinking too much and singing to the trees. Mary Cemetery is famous for those crosses if you haven't seen. Pictures, brilliant blue paint, naive folk art carvings, little stories and rhymes about the person who's buried there. Some are funny, some are blunt. They don't really do the solemn angels and granite slabs. It's color and honesty. We got there on a late afternoon bus that rumbled like it was chewing gravel for dinner. The driver kept patting the dashboard when we hit bumps, like he was soothing a nervous horse. It was humid and the sky was starting to bruise purple in the distance. I remember that because I had a red scarf tied to my pack that kept fluttering into my face each time we stopped and the door opened. Mags teased me about the scarf the whole trip, said it made me look like an artsy hitchhiker from a French movie. I only brought it because my neck sunburns easily. We found a guest house with a wooden gate and a courtyard where a woman named Anna, pronounced Anna, she corrected kindly, sat shelling peas with her mother. The mother had the sort of face you want to draw even if you can't draw, wide cheeks and eyes that didn't move much until they did. They gave us a room with 2 creaky beds and a window that opened toward the cemetery. You could see the blue crosses peeking over the brick wall like a lineup of tall children in bright coats. Anna asked where we were from and where we were going. When we said the cemetery, she nodded like that made sense. Tomorrow is better, she said, then added, but it's open. People go in the evening sometimes. It's very calm. Then she said something to her mother, who looked at my scarf and frowned. You don't like red? I joked. The older woman shook her head once slowly like a metronome. Color is nice, she said finally, her accent softening the vowels. Just don't tie it there. She pointed toward the cemetery wall. We laughed because we didn't get it, because sometimes you laugh when you're being warned without realizing it. We went at dusk anyway because we were restless from sitting on the bus all day, and because the light was doing that magical golden thing that makes even chipped paint look romantic. There were a handful of older people tending graves, sweeping, straightening flowers. A man locked a tiny church door with a key that looked older than the building. No one paid us much attention. We walked the paths and read what we could. Our phone cameras were full of photos by the time the sky went from gold to blue, to a deeper blue that made the bright crosses seem to glow from within. That's when I found the woodcutter's cross. It was not exactly like the one in the photo our friend had sent. The figures are all hand-carved, so each one is slightly different. This one showed a man in a green shirt, brown trousers, and a red belt. He was holding an axe over his shoulder, and behind him a painted tree leaned toward him like it was eavesdropping. At his feet was a small wooden mallet and a wedge. The poem underneath, there's always a poem, was in Romanian with a few words in Hungarian. I don't read either language, but some pieces you can guess. There was a line with cântă, which I knew means sing. Mags pulled up a translation app and held it over the letters like a dowsing rod. The live translation came out, crooked like someone was texting me from a moving car. He cuts the wood, he loves a drink. He sings at night when stars all blink. We laughed. That's cute, she said. Singing is better than haunting. As we were leaving, I tugged on my scarf to adjust it, and the knot came loose and dropped it. It slipped out of my hand and slid along the grass. It scooted the wrong way, toward the woodcutter's cross. I took 2 steps to grab it, but a woman with a broom, a caretaker, I guess, beat me there. She bent, the broom slanting across her back like a scythe, and picked up the red cloth. She held it for a second like she was weighing it. Then she handed it to me without smiling. "Don't tie," she said, and tapped the handle of her broom against the wood of the cross, one soft knock, and moved on. I stuffed the scarf deep into my pack like I'd been caught with contraband. We planned to go back in the morning, get better photos, read more poems in actual daylight. We went to the only open place for dinner, a room with 3 tables, a television in the corner playing muted football, and a waitress who had been around long enough to call everyone sweetheart without sounding fake. We ate something with cabbage and pork and thought we were very brave. On the way back, a boy rode past us on a bicycle without lights and yelled something that sounded like "Nopte which the translation app told me was "good night." It was good until it wasn't. Around 2 in the morning, my phone said 2:07 exactly. I woke up because someone was playing a song outside. That isn't as weird as it sounds. Villages breathe at their own pace. Dogs bark at nothing. Roosters forget what time to do their thing. But this wasn't a dog or a drunk. It was a melody, thin as thread, weaving in and out of itself, simple and stubborn. It made me think of when my grandma hummed while peeling apples, a tune that had no beginning or end. At first I thought it was a radio. It had that wavering, far-away quality. But there were no words, just that lilting tune and a soft knock, every so often like a rhythm kept with a stick on a doorframe. I sat up and looked over at Mags. She was on her stomach, one arm under her pillow, mouth slightly open. I whispered her name and she didn't move. Outside, the tune rose and fell. I went to the window, pushed it open carefully. The cemetery wall was brewed black in the moonlight. Our courtyard was still. If I leaned out, I could see the top of the blue crosses. The air smelled like damp earth and lilacs, and there, without any drama, was the shape of a man standing by the woodcutter's cross. If you're looking for details, I don't have many. He didn't glow. He didn't float. He was just there. A man, maybe my height, shoulders a little hunched, swaying slightly like he was stepping to his own time. I remember the paleness of his forearms in the moonlight because his sleeves were rolled to the elbow. I remember a flash of something red. For a dumb second, I thought my scarf had blown back outside, but that made no sense. The tune came from him, not from his mouth exactly, but from the place where his chest met his throat, like he was resonating. The knock wasn't a knock. It was the sound of wood on wood, a tool touching what it understood. He swayed. He was humming. I stood there long enough that my feet started hurting on the wooden floorboards. I don't know how long that is. The tune didn't speed up or slow down. It faded a little when a breeze moved through the trees and then came back. I didn't feel threatened, not at first. I felt intruded upon, like I had walked in on something private. After a while, minutes, hours, who knows, I whispered, "Stop." My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The humming paused and every hair along my arms lifted. He turned his head, but I couldn't see his face. I know that sounds like a cheap horror twist, but the moon and the leaves conspired to make a coin of shadow where features should have been. He may have had a hat on, I can't be sure. He looked at my window. The tune started again, almost apologetic, like when a waiter realizes you were mid-sentence and retreats. The sway went with it. That's when I did the thing I can't explain. I raised my scarf, which I must have pulled out at some point without noticing, and held it out through the window like a flag. "This?" I whispered. "Ridiculous." I wasn't trying to offer it. I was trying to make sense. He swayed once more, and the melody threaded down a note, like a nod. The knock came gentle, wood on wood. I yanked the scarf back in and shut the window. I got into bed and lay there with the scarf balled up under my chin like a child with a blanket. At some point I slept. In the morning, we went back to the cemetery because that's what you do. You eat leftover bread with jam. You shake your damp shoes out, you pretend you had a normal night. The caretaker with the broom was back. She looked like she'd been there since before daylight. Mags wanted to find a cross she had liked the night before, one with a woman stirring a pot, the rhyme teasing her about burning soup. We wandered until we were each swallowed by different rows. I found the woodcutter again because of course I did. The paint looked a little brighter in daylight. The axe, the tree, the wedge, every detail was crisp and just a little too cheerful. I read the poem out loud as best I could, slow, syllable by syllable. Romanian has round sounds. You can sort of feel your way through it even if you're wrong. I held the app over the carving. The translation snatched words and reordered them. It kept the part about singing, but there was a new bit at the end. 4 words that shoved me in the chest. Guest with red scarf. The app's translation stuttered, corrected, a foreign guest with a red scarf. Then it added, and a borrowed song. I swallowed because the taste in my mouth went metal and old. Mags caught up to me and I made her read it too. We scanned the lines together. She frowned, then shrugged. Maybe it said that before and we missed it. She tapped the wood lightly with her fingernail. Or maybe someone liked your fashion statements. The caretaker appeared like she'd grown up out of the ground. Don't do that, she told Mags about the tapping and put her palm over the letters. She looked up at me, then at the scarf tied to my pack, and her expression made me feel like a child who has tracked mud onto a white rug. You slept with the window open, she said. It wasn't a question, is that bad? I said, trying to keep my tone light. She glanced toward the small church, toward the line of tall grass that backed up to a field, and then back to me. Sometimes they sing for themselves, she said. Sometimes they sing for the visitor. I don't know if you've ever been told a thing that sounds like folklore but lands like a rule, but I nodded without understanding. Mags, more practical than me, asked the caretaker if we could leave a few lei for the upkeep. The woman slipped the money into the front of her apron and tucked it under a fold. I almost asked her the question that was mashing around in my throat. What happens if the poem changes? Instead, I said thank you and we took a walk around the perimeter like tourists who don't want to admit they're spooked. We left that afternoon for Siget again, then south. No more village buses, we decided. We treated ourselves to a train with seats that reclined 2 degrees, which felt like luxury. On the platform, a kid selling sunflower seeds stared at my scarf like he recognized it. I kept it tied to my pack anyway. I thought distance and motion would rinse everything out. The way you can shake off a bad dream by talking about it in the sun. The nights after that were loud with regular noises. Snoring in hostels. Pipes ticking. Scooters going by on streets too narrow for scooters. I never heard the tune again. Not until I got home. It started small. I'd be washing dishes and realize I was humming. Nothing unusual, everybody hums. But it was that line, that loop, the way the last note never resolved. I'd catch myself and stop. Then later I'd be in line at the pharmacy with that exact pattern in my throat again. The first time it really shook me was when I woke at 2:07 on a Tuesday. No alarm, no car horns. Just my eyes open in the dark and the certainty that someone had finished a verse and was waiting for the next. I recorded a voice memo. It was dumb. 15 seconds of me breathing and saying, okay, and then nothing. A week later, I woke to my upstairs neighbor complaining through the ceiling. She's an insomniac. She reports the movements of the world like a weather service. She said, do you have a wind chime or something? It's making me crazy. I apologized and told her no, I didn't. She asked if I might be playing something at night. Like what? I said too quickly. Like a flute? She said. Or some little, I don't know. Or maybe you walk around in clogs. We laughed. I bought her a plant. I tried to go to bed earlier. I tried going to bed later. Each time 2:07 waited like a door that opens to the same small room no matter which corridor you take. I told Mags because she knows the version of me I don't show anyone else. The one that gets jumpy and tender at the edges. She said very gently, you know your brain can stick to patterns. Like a song stuck in your head but bigger. We had an odd night. It set up camp. The app probably mistranslated the thing. You saw a guy tending a grave at night. Could have been a family member, right? Or a neighbor. That caretaker probably tells everyone a version of the same warning to keep kids from vandalizing. We got creeped. That's the whole story. Then she said, but if it helps, I'll come over. We'll sit up. We won't feed it. She came over on a Friday with 2 coffees and that look she gets when she's pretending not to be worried. We stayed awake through 2:07. I didn't hear it. I almost cried from relief, which would have been embarrassing. She went home grinning. You see? She said, you just had to be seen by a person who knows you. The spell is broken. I fell asleep at 3. At 4:31, I woke up because there had been a knock. Not a knock like at the door. A knock like wood speaking to wood. I started keeping notes. The time wasn't always the same. Sometimes it was 1:53, sometimes 3:12, always between 1 and 4. The humming wasn't always external. Sometimes it was me. I hate that sentence, but it's true. I'd be awake, furious, and discover my mouth shaping the tune while I held my teeth together like a kid resisting medicine. Other times it was in the wall, like someone downstairs had an old radio farther away than the song could reach. Once, and this is the part that's hardest to say without sounding like I've decided to be haunted, I saw a man on the sidewalk across from my building at an hour when people are mostly only out for newspapers or emergencies. He wasn't looking up. He was swaying slightly like he was weight testing a step he hadn't taken yet. His sleeves were rolled up. He had a red something, belt? Rag? Around his middle. He didn't look at me. I watched from behind the blinds until the soft knock lined up with a taxi door slamming and hid inside the noise. Tried writing it all down then and stopped halfway through because it felt like notarizing something I wanted to deny. But that morning I did something that made me feel better. Irrationally. I took the scarf out of my backpack and folded it into a drawer. I told myself that was that. The drawer stuck on its track and I had to bump it with my hip to close it. And when it shut, there was that little wooden thud that made my heart stutter. I opened the drawer and moved the scarf to a chair, then closed the drawer again gently like it was a sleeping creature. A month after we got back, a package arrived at my building with no return address. Inside was a postcard-sized print of a photograph. It was one of those oversaturated tourist shots of Mary Cemetery, a wall of blue crosses, a woman in a headscarf walking away, the church spire peeking like a pencil. Around the border, someone had written in blue marker in English, "We hope you had a nice visit." It wasn't menacing. It looked like a vendor's flyer. But on the back, in small, neat handwriting, there was a single line in Romanian and the English underneath. Songs are for those who listen. There was no signature. I asked Mags if she'd sent it, thinking it was her gentle way of poking fun. She swore she hadn't. I believed her because if she was going to make a joke, she would have gone bigger. I went to the library and found a book on the cemetery. It had pictures of many of the crosses, some recognizable, some I'd missed entirely. There was a woodcutter in the book, but not ours. His poem talked about a broken foot and a wife who scolded him. There was a section explaining the folk artists who carved and painted the wood, how the bright blue is known as sapunsa blue, how the rhymes are sometimes playful, sometimes biting, always meant to tell a bit of the truth. It mentioned that caretakers touch up the paint periodically. It did not mention poems changing. Books don't write about what moves at night. I tried one last thing, a silly bargain with myself. I told the tune it could have 1 minute and then I would sleep. I said it out loud one night because I was out of cleverness. "You can have 1 minute," I whispered, holding my pillow like a polite hostage. "And then please let me rest." I watched the second hand on my clock and those 60 ticks were crowded with that thin melody like birds on a wire. When the minute ended, the tune faded. I fell asleep. I thought I was a genius for a day. On the second night, I made the same offer. The tune came a little stronger, and when it ended, I heard the knock, soft, fond, like a teacher tapping a desk to show a student where to begin again. On the third night, before I could offer anything, my phone lit up with a new voice memo created at 2:07. I hadn't touched it. I play it sometimes, even though I shouldn't. It's just what I described. Thin humming and that wooden tap. But at the 9-second mark, there's a whisper, a scrape of breath, a shape of words that could be anything until you hear them as something. It sounds like imprumutata. I looked it up. It means borrowed. Last week, this is what finally pushed me to write. I logged onto that translation app again and typed the lines of the woodcutter's poem as best I could remember them from the photo I took. The app autofilled a few words since I'd searched them before. I pressed translate. It gave me the same playful quatrain about cutting wood and singing at night. And at the bottom, the app placed a final line it hadn't suggested before. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the developers updated their model. Maybe I wanted to see it. The line said in English, "He sings for the friend who wore the red scarf." I closed the app. I opened the photo to check the original letters. The last line there was just paint, familiar, unchanging. I know lettering. I used to letter posters for school. If you paint a new line over old varnish, you can see the seam. There is no seam in my photo. There's just wood, paint, blue sky, and the feeling that when we look at the version that suits us, the other version looks back anyway. Mags told me to delete the audio, the photos, the app. "Don't give it hooks," she said, half joking, like you tell a friend not to text their ex. I tried. I deleted the memo files and emptied the trash. 2 nights later, a new memo appeared, time-stamped 3/12. I watched it arrive, a small gray rectangle sliding into the list while I looked at the screen. I'm not tech illiterate. I know about bugs and updates and prank apps. I know what my phone does and what it doesn't. But when I pressed play, I heard the same phrase a little clearer. The consonants like tapping a sharp nail against wood. Imprumutata, borrowed. It's hard to explain why I haven't told more people. Partly because saying it makes it feel like I'm asking to make it worse. Partly because any version I can say out loud sounds either like a gentle folktale or like a confession of loneliness. The truth is more boring and more frightening. There is a song that has the stamina of water. It will carve through anything given enough time. I still have the red scarf. It's on the back of my chair. I tried once to leave it at a church near my apartment, folded on a donation table like I was returning a library book to the wrong branch and hoping they'd get it where it needed to go. A volunteer ran after me into the sunshine, waving it like a bright flag. "You forgot this," she called, smiling. "It looks like it belongs to you." Her kindness made my hands shake. I took it back. People keep returning it to me even when I try to make it not mine. A friend of a friend has a cousin in Bayamare who said he knows someone who does the painting at Old Cemetery. He offered to ask about the woodcutter's cross. I almost said yes. Then I stopped myself because I pictured a man in a green shirt reading a message on a cracked phone, looking up at a row of blue, and hearing a tune arrive in his chest like a sparrow that won't leave. I don't want him to have it. I don't want anyone else to wake at 2:07 with their mouth moving and not recognize the sound, so I've made peace with the idea that sometimes I will hear it and sometimes I won't. It's easier if I keep the window closed. It's easier if I keep the scarf where I can see it. Like watching a shape keeps it from changing when you turn away. When I do sleep, it's thick and without dreams. When I don't, I listen. The song winds around the night like a path someone wore through tall grass. It is not violent. It is not even sad. It is just certain. And this morning, before I wrote this, there was an envelope under my door with no stamp and no address. Inside was a small square of glossy paper, a printing of a new photograph. It is the woodcutter's cross, Sapansa blue shining like lake water. The poem is clear under the man with the raised axe. The last line is in large, darker letters as if repainted recently. It says nothing about drinking, nothing about stars. The English words are crooked, but they are there. Borrowed song, not to be kept. Below that line, tucked against the painted grass at the woodcutter's feet, is a tiny patch of red, a detail I swear wasn't there before. It could be the belt. It could be a scrap of cloth. It could be a trick of photos, of edits, of wanting. I laid the photo next to my scarf and for a moment they were the same red. Then the light shifted and they weren't. The melody has been very quiet today, like the air is catching its breath. I know better than to think it's gone. Tonight will come as it always does. And maybe there will be no sound at all. Or maybe, when everything in my apartment is as still as a painted scene, I'll hear a soft, steady knock through the wall, wood recognizing wood, and a tune that curls up inside the dark and waits for me to hum it back. I didn't plan on writing this, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is still waiting for my reply, and I need to put it somewhere besides my head. I make a living playing guitar for strangers. It's not romantic, not really. It's waking up to damp cases and fingers that smell like coins. Paris is kinder to buskers than most cities, or maybe I've just learned where to stand. On the days when the tourists are thick and the metro is loud, I go to Père Lachaise and set up near the wall where the communards were shot. It's a solemn place, but it's where the sound travels the way I like. The stone throws your chords back at you like they were meant to echo. If you've ever been to that corner, you know about the wind. It wraps around the wall and through the cypresses like someone is whispering in a language you almost remember. The air there always smells like rain on iron, even when the sky is white and empty. I learned early that minor chords draw the slow walkers. You'd be surprised how many people want to be a little sad on their vacation. Most days it was me. My old Yamaha with the fretboard chewed smooth under the G-string, and the usual background characters you collect when you stay anywhere long enough. There was a florist named Madame Rousseau who sold damp bundles of carnations to people with damp faces. There was a groundskeeper, Delattre, who had been there longer than any tree could remember and wore a cap no matter the season. There were the guards at the gates who would nod and pretend they didn't see me slip in early or leave late. And there were other buskers who drifted by now and then, Marco with his fiddled-up cello, and Leia with a voice that sounded like morning radio and cigarettes. Leia is the friend who will come up again. She's the person who believed me long enough to be scared. The first time I saw the Pale Listener, I had just tuned down for a song I play when my hands feel honest. It's simple. A cradle of a melody that moves between E minor and C with a little F that catches on the way up. A man in a dark coat was already there when I looked up. He stood a little back from the low chain that keeps tourists from getting too close to the wall. He wasn't doing what people do when they listen. No phone, no smile. He had that stillness people only get when they're studying something expensive in a shop window and pretending it isn't meant for them. He never clapped, never nodded. I thought maybe he was grieving and I'd hit the wrong mood at the right time. It happens, but as I played, I noticed he leaned in the tiniest bit whenever I slid to a minor chord, like the sound made him heavier. The tilt was small, less than a breath, but it had a rhythm to it. I went to G and nothing, back to E minor, and he leaned. I tried not to stare. People grieve how they grieve. When I finished, I looked down and there were coins in the case I didn't recognize. Old francs, the kind with the wheat sheaf, dull and soft-edged like they'd been rubbing against other coins for a long time. A couple of centimes with holes? No euros. Madame Rousseau saw them as she passed by and made a little sound through her lip. On ne les dépense plus, ça, she said. We don't spend those anymore. She shrugged. Les gens aiment le vieux. People like old things. I didn't tell her I hadn't seen the man's hand move. The next day, the same man stood there when I started, coat buttoned to the throat, the posture of a polite ghost. I watched his eyes, gray or blue I couldn't tell because the light was the color of paper. When I dropped into minor, he leaned. When I lightened, he went still. After 3 songs, I nodded to him, a sort of thank you for braving the cold with me nod. No change. People walked between us, the kind of slow, reverent walk that feels like it's borrowed from a church. Leia came by in a scarf that made her look like a comet. She lent her voice to one tune and the man leaned and leaned until I thought he'd tip over the chain. I wanted to speak to him to ask if he was okay, but when I finished, the space he'd been in was a fold in the air and nothing else. I started to look for him. That's how it starts with any city. A familiar stranger becomes a landmark. On the metro, you've got the kid with the skateboard who never looks up. At the canal, you've got the jogger who always slows near the bridge. For me, it was the pale listener at the wall. Some days he didn't come, and I told myself it didn't matter. Other days, if I was testing a new piece and he wasn't there to lean, I played worse. I know that makes me sound foolish. It's just that buskers measure themselves by the faces we move. Applause is nice, coins are rent, but a face you can change with a chord. This is why we stay out in the cold. Delattre, who likes to pretend he is unmovable, came by once while I was playing and said, "Your quiet friend, he's from the section of the unclaimed." He said it like a joke that wasn't a joke. Pauper's Corner, no names. The city pays for their dirt. He stuffed his hands in his coat and walked off. When I tried to ask him what he meant, he waved a gloved hand at the slope of monuments and said, "Everything you need to know is already listening. I don't believe in much beyond strings and weather, but you can't stand in that place with the crows braiding the air and the stone riding its own shadow and not feel watched." I told Leia about the man when we were splitting a bag of chestnuts by the big tomb everyone rubs for luck. "You're becoming superstitious," she said, but she didn't laugh. "Do you think he's just, I don't know, lonely?" I said maybe, and she said, "Then play him something that goes home and stops." It was exactly the kind of advice you can't use, but that still sits in your pocket. This is the part none of you will believe, and I don't care. You weren't there to smell that rain on iron scent on a day when the sky was dry. You didn't watch the same pair of gray eyes lean at the same chord like a metronome had caught his spine. The afternoon had turned. A light rain had started, the kind that doesn't convince anyone to open an umbrella, just turns the air into gray thread. I had the wall behind me and the case open in front, and I was playing something new. I'd written it the night before in my tiny apartment, fingers frozen because my radiator is a rumor until January. A descending thing, careful, like stepping down old stairs. The man was there, of course. When I hit the minor climb, he leaned. A busload of students came through, all shoes and whispers and the beeping of a digital camera that had no reason to beep. I lowered my volume, let the students pass. When they were gone, I saw him making a gesture, almost imperceptible, like he was gathering something with his hand and bringing it toward his chest. I felt stupid, but I stepped forward a little to hear him if he spoke. He didn't. He turned and walked, smooth as a shadow, and I followed before I decided to follow. I tucked the strap of my guitar around my neck so my hands were free to keep it steady, and pushed the case along with my foot because the good coins sometimes fall in while you walk. We went through a run of family tombs that looked like little houses with their own doorbells, past a bent angel who watched us with broken eyes. The path got narrower. The chains disappeared. We crossed a small flat clearing I'd never noticed, a piece of ground with nothing to claim it. No stones, no plaques, just grass the color of a bruise and lines in the dirt like something had been moved a long time ago, and nobody wanted to talk about it. He stopped at the center of it. I stopped too, because if you walk right into the middle of any space that quiet without stopping, I think the space swallows you. We faced each other. The rain became more itself, thicker, like someone had wrung out a dark towel above us. That smell of iron rose up hard enough to taste. He lifted his hand and turned his palm up in a way that, if he had been anyone else, would have made me reach out without thinking. But he wasn't anyone else. He was the curve of a space where a person should be. I said, "Do you want me to play?" It felt stupid to speak English to a person I'd never heard say a word, but speaking French felt like borrowing a coat I hadn't earned. He didn't nod. He didn't blink. I swear he leaned, so I played. The sound in that unmarked patch of earth was different. At the wall, the stone throws your voice back. Here the ground caught it and kept it. Each note felt heavier leaving the string, like it had somewhere it was supposed to go. There's a trick you learn when you busk, where you hold back a little so you can pull people forward without exhausting them. I couldn't hold back. The melody grew its own legs. My fingers kept up. If you play, you know the feeling when the guitar stops being wood and becomes the thing inside the wood that has been wanting to come out since the tree was young. It was that, but colder. While I played, the case filled. I didn't see hands. I didn't hear a single click of coin on coin. But when I glanced down, the dark lining was notched with old francs and centimes, greenish coins with faces I knew only from history books. They looked like they'd been sleeping under something heavy. I kept playing because I didn't know what would happen if I stopped. The man listened like the rain was his and I was borrowing it. When I ended, there was a small, polite silence that felt like the moment before a bird decides whether to land on a statue or your shoulder. He reached toward the case. His hand didn't touch anything, and then he turned and walked away between two cedar trunks that weren't near each other. I followed past one, then the other, and stood on a path I recognized. The unmarked patch was not behind me. It was just the same street of stone houses carrying their family names. My case was heavy in my hand. I opened it once more because I needed to see that I hadn't imagined it, and the coins winked like fishes trapped in shallow water. Leia didn't want to hear it at first. We were on the steps near the gate, splitting a terrible pretzel and watching the sky decide to be night. "You're telling me a man who never blinks paid you with money that doesn't exist, and then took you to a place that doesn't exist?" She said, and then softer, "I believe you. I'm trying to say it in a way that won't mess up my sleep." "Listen to this," I said. I had recorded that last song on my phone, a habit I have for when the cold makes me sloppy and I need to check whether it's my hands or my ears. I played the file for her. For the first 30 seconds you can hear the rain, the clean pluck of strings, a couple of tourist footsteps. Then the sound changes, the way it does when you walk into an old church and your voice becomes more than one voice. Under my guitar there is another one. It's slightly out of tune, not badly, just enough for the teeth behind your ears to move. A second guitar, behind, beneath, maybe even inside the first, playing the melody half a breath late, like someone learning a song in the next room. You can hear me breathe. The track is unforgiving that way. And you can hear the little squeak my E string makes because I've been promising to change it for weeks. Through all that, the other guitar comes in and goes where I go, never getting ahead, never falling behind. When I slowed at the end, leaving the last chord to find its own bed, the second guitar did not stop exactly when I did. It went one more count, as if it thought there was one more step to take. Leia didn't speak for a long time. She watched my phone like it might explain itself if it felt seen. "You layered this," she said finally. A test balloon she didn't believe in. I shook my head. Then it's a duet. She held the phone to her ear once more, eyes closed, as if looking would make the wrong part of the sound win. "It's coming from below you," she said, although we both knew that's not information ears can really give. We went to show Marco that night at the bar where buskers go when they want to be buskers somewhere warmer. He listened with his head turned the way musicians do when we try to turn one ear into an instrument. He handed the phone back without a joke. "Basement reverb," he said. "But the ground out there is not basement, it is ground." He pressed his palm flat to the bar. "Be careful where you teach a song," he said to me, like older musicians do to younger ones, although he is only older than me by the width of a pick. The rational part of me tried very hard the next day. I checked the map of Père Lachaise. There's a map by the entrance, and there are many maps online, with grids and legends and all the tourist sites. Jim Morrison, Oscar Wilde, a famous composer I pretend to listen to when his fans are around. There is no section of the unclaimed, not on the maps people get. Delater wasn't at his usual rounds. Madame Rousseau said her supplier had been late, which felt like a detail from another story. I went to the wall and tuned slowly. He was there. Rain again, softer than before. And I wondered if maybe the smell of iron is just rain's way of saying hello to stone. He leaned at the minor chords. I played the new song. If the first day had felt like the ground taking sound into itself, the second felt like the ground had learned the tune and was trying to hum along through its teeth. More old coins in the case. A centum with a square hole. A sliver of something like copper worn down until the face was a whisper. When I picked one up, the metal was cold in a way that felt personal. That evening, Leia and I decided not to close our eyes about it. "If there's a real place," she said, "let's find it when it's almost closed and nobody cares." I waited near the gate until the guard flicked the lights and shouted that the cemetery was closing. Then I waited on the street where the stones look like skyscrapers in a city nobody can afford. I counted to 500, went back to the side gate where the latch doesn't quite argue like it should, and slipped in. Leia came behind me with a flashlight and a thermos of something that made my throat warm. We walked in the rain that had become a fine mist, more air than water, and we let our feet take us because memory has a better map than paper. I found the two-seaters that weren't near each other and the fold in the path where my feet had felt like they were stepping off a curb that had been removed. There was the flat patch of ground, the bruised grass, the lines in the dirt like small scars. "There," I said, and my voice came back wrong. Not an echo, not an answer. A memory of a voice that didn't want to be alone. We stood at the center and the iron smell rose up like a breath that had waited all day to be let out. Leia squeezed my arm once, not fear exactly, not reassurance, but a punctuation mark. I took out my guitar and played the first phrase of the song. Just the first phrase. The second guitar was there immediately. Beneath, behind, in, I can't tell. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't a trick. You could feel it in your coat buttons. You could feel it in the small place in your ankle where a kid's bad soccer game never healed right. Leia's flashlight flickered. That can be batteries. Weather does this to cheap lamps. But it's hard to say batteries when the beam falls to the grass and lights the coin someone has just placed at your foot, with a courtesy that feels older than your city. I picked up the coin and it had no face left to speak with. I put it in the case. Leia didn't say anything. She put the flashlight in her mouth and clapped softly on 2 and 4, as if we were in a bar after work and not in a place with no names. I played longer than I meant to. The duet found our pockets, the spaces between notes where even silence can sweat. There was a point where, this is the part my body remembers with nausea, where the ground under my right foot felt thin, like a drum skin that had been stretched by hot hands. I shifted my weight and the sound shifted too, like the second guitar inhaled. Leia reached for my sleeve. "Enough," she said around the flashlight. "Enough for tonight. We left faster than we came." The gate was still unlatched. The street was the street again, with scooters and the neon pharmacy sign blinking its green cross and a couple arguing softly about the price of something. I slept badly and woke up feeling like I had not stopped playing in my dreams. You think this is where any careful person would stop? You think this is where I would say I never went back, and I told myself it was a trick of acoustics and grief, and the brain's hunger for patterns. I don't have that virtue. I am greedy for the note that opens people and for the face that leans. I went back the next day and the next. The man was there each time, polite as weather. The coins kept coming, old as the stories people tell at tables when they think no waiter is listening. I stopped telling people. It's one thing to have your friend hold your phone and nod. It's another for acquaintances to decide you've grown fond of cemeteries in a way that worries them. I bought a little Zoom recorder with money I couldn't have earned from just tourists. I downloaded the tracks onto my laptop, kept the files like postcards. If you were to listen to them, you would hear the second guitar get bolder, still behind, still a breath late, but the grace notes it added were not mine. They sounded like patience. They sounded like the work a person does with their hands when nobody is paying them, and the light is wrong. The last afternoon was bright. As bright as that place gets, anyway. The crows were quiet like even they had errands inside. I tuned, hit the minor chord, and he leaned. I smiled because it had become ritual. I played. I don't know if it was the way my fingers landed or just that some unnamed clock had wound down. But between my first and second chorus, the ground made a sound I felt in every tooth. A soft, dry tapping from beneath my shoes, as if someone had found their way underneath the drum skin and wanted me to know they were there. Not frantic, not even urgent. Just a measured I am here in a language that uses bones instead of vowels. I stopped playing without meaning to. The second guitar kept going for one measure, then stopped too, almost embarrassed. The tapping continued for a count of 8. Then silence and the iron smell so thick I thought about blood and then refused to think about blood anymore. The man was still standing across from me. He lifted his hand halfway and let it fall. The gesture had exactly as much force in it as a paper falling off a shelf. I did the worst thing I could have done. I put the guitar down and dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the ground like a child in a Western movie listening for a train. I heard rainwater moving in the small ways rainwater moves under everything. I heard my heart going too fast. I heard the little creak sounds that wood makes when it is trying to remember what it was before it was a guitar. I heard the tapping once more directly under my ear. 3 small taps and a pause and then 2. "Stop," someone said. It was not a voice from the ground. It was Leia. I didn't hear her walk up. She had her scarf around her hair like a nurse, and she looked the way people look when they are trying to hold 3 thoughts in the same hand without dropping any of them. "Please," she said, not meaning me alone. "Please." I stood. Standing took a moment longer than it should have. The man was watching us. He was always watching, I suppose, and I had just not allowed myself to think of it as watching. Leia didn't look at him. She took my guitar and case, and because I am not a complete fool, I let her take them. We backed away, and the ground felt normal again. Or as normal as ground can feel when you know it has a throat. This would be less terrifying if that were the end. If I said I never went back and the files corrupted themselves and the coins turned into buttons in my case. But it didn't end. I stopped going to Père Lachaise for a while. I played the metro where the sound echoes off tile, and people drop coins because they're late and they feel guilty. I took shifts with Marco near the canal where drunk boys think they can sing harmony, and girls throw soft insults like flowers. I didn't play the song. I told myself new melodies until they were true. I slept with music on because silence made the tapping easier to imagine. And then the sounds followed me. My upstairs neighbor is a man who wears slippers and listens to the news at a soft, scolding volume. He walks heavy when his soccer team loses. A week after we decided to stop, he was away visiting a sister in Nice. He told me because he worries about leaving plants. That night, as I was making tea in a kettle that never stops complaining, I heard a guitar under my floor, slightly out of tune, a breath late. The melody had learned to find me. It stopped the moment I set the kettle down, as if I had startled a small animal. When I moved, it moved. When I held still, it waited like a good dog. I went to the bar where buskers hide from themselves. I showed Marco the newest recording. The second guitar was louder, more sure. He rubbed his face as if there was an answer under the skin. "Maybe you should," he began, and we didn't find the end of the sentence. He and I are not priests. We have no incantations beyond chords. Leia suggested something that felt like sanity. "Play it once more," she said. "But not there." Not anywhere with dirt under it. In a place with nothing below. On a bridge, on steel. Let the water have it if it wants it. So we went to Pont de la Tournelle near midnight, because the river is honest and there's a saint there who looks as if she could keep a secret. The wind on a bridge isn't the wind of a cemetery. It is faster and less personal. I stood at the center, stone under my boots, and played the melody as soft as my hands would allow. The second guitar came very quietly, like a shadow too small for its owner. It stayed behind me, it stayed polite. The water took the sound whole. When I ended, the second guitar ended with me. I looked at Leia like we'd pulled off some trick. She smiled back and I realized we were congratulating ourselves on teaching a river to keep our ghost. I still don't go back to the unmarked patch. I don't look for the pale listener because I don't need to. Some mornings when I wake, there is a coin on my windowsill. Old soft face rubbed down to a rumor. Sometimes my case is heavier than it should be. And when I open it, there's dirt in the lining wet enough to stain my fingers with the smell of rain on iron. At night, if I try to play that song alone in my room, the second guitar will come in after a bar like we agreed long ago to always give each other space. I put my best recording of the duet online once as a test under a name that isn't mine. It got a few plays. The comments were the usual mix. Someone accusing me of overdub, someone saying they cried at the second phrase because it reminded them of their grandfather's hands. There was one message in my inbox the next morning from an address with numbers like a locker combination. No subject line. Inside, a single sentence. Please follow. No punctuation. No language you can place. Just the little hunger between the two words. I took the file down. Maybe you'll say I'm superstitious. Maybe you'll say I'm ungrateful. People have given me money from under the ground for making shapes in the air. But the thing about duets is that you owe the other player respect. You give them space. You don't make them chase you. You pay them in attention if you have no coins left that the banks will accept. Some evenings I still pass the cemetery on my way to somewhere more ordinary. The gate is closed, but the crows don't care about locks, and neither do the names written in stone. If I stop even for a second, I'll hear something I can't unhear. Sometimes it's only the wind moving through a chain that was rusted on purpose. Sometimes it's the quiet of a city that has crouched to tie its shoe. And sometimes, if I'm honest, from beneath the pavement, from beneath the rooms, beneath the river and the bridges and the brief people we are, I hear a guitar find my note and follow. A breath late, always polite, never clapping, just leaning closer at every minor chord thinking. The last afternoon was bright. As bright as that place gets anyway. The crows were quiet like even they had errands inside. I tuned, hit the minor chord, and he leaned. I smiled because it had become ritual. I played. I don't know if it was the way my fingers landed, or just that some unnamed clock had wound down. But between my first and second chorus, the ground made a sound I felt in every tooth, a soft dry tapping from beneath my shoes, as if someone had found their way underneath the drum skin and wanted me to know they were there. Not frantic, not even urgent, just a measured I am here in a language that uses bones instead of vowels. I stopped playing without meaning to. The second guitar kept going for one measure, then stopped too, almost embarrassed. The tapping continued for a count of 8. Then silence, and the iron smell so thick I thought about blood and then refused to think about blood anymore. The man was still standing across from me. He lifted his hand halfway and let it fall. The gesture had exactly as much force in it as a paper falling off a shelf. I did the worst thing I could have done. I put the guitar down and dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the ground like a child in a Western movie, listening for a train. I heard rainwater moving in the small ways rainwater moves under everything. I heard my heart going too fast. I heard the little creak sounds that wood makes when it is trying to remember what it was before it was a guitar. I heard the tapping once more directly under my ear, 3 small taps and a pause and then 2. "Stop," someone said. It was not a voice from the ground. It was Leia. I didn't hear her walk up. She had her scarf around her hair like a nurse. And she looked the way people look when they are trying to hold 3 thoughts in the same hand without dropping any of them. "Please," she said, not meaning me alone. "Please," I stood. Standing took a moment longer than it should have. The man was watching us. He was always watching, I suppose, and I had just not allowed myself to think of it as watching. Leia didn't look at him. She took my guitar and case, and because I am not a complete fool, I let her take them. We backed away, and the ground felt normal again. Or as normal as ground can feel when you know it has a throat. This would be less terrifying if that were the end. If I said I never went back and the files corrupted themselves and the coins turned into buttons in my case? But it didn't end. I stopped going to Père Lachaise for a while. I played the metro where the sound echoes off tile and people drop coins because they're late and they feel guilty. I took shifts with Marco near the canal where drunk boys think they can sing harmony and girls throw soft insults like flowers. I didn't play the song. I told myself new melodies until they were true. I slept with music on because silence made the tapping easier to imagine. And then the sounds followed me. My upstairs neighbor is a man who wears slippers and listens to the news at a soft, scolding volume. He walks heavy when his soccer team loses. A week after we decided to stop, he was away visiting a sister in Nice. He told me because he worries about leaving plants. That night, as I was making tea in a kettle that never stops complaining, I heard a guitar under my floor, slightly out of tune, a breath late. The melody had learned to find me. It stopped the moment I set the kettle down as if I had startled a small animal. When I moved, it moved. When I held still, it waited like a good dog. I went to the bar where buskers hide from themselves. I showed Marco the newest recording. The second guitar was louder, more sure. He rubbed his face as if there was an answer under the skin. "Maybe you should," he began, and we didn't find the end of the sentence. He and I are not priests. We have no incantations beyond chords. Leia suggested something that felt like sanity. "Play it once more," she said. But not there. Not anywhere with dirt under it. In a place with nothing below. On a bridge, on steel. Let the water have it if it wants it. So we went to Pont de la Tournelle near midnight. Because the river is honest and there's a saint there who looks as if she could keep a secret. The wind on a bridge isn't the wind of a cemetery. It is faster and less personal. I stood at the center, stone under my boots, and played the melody as soft as my hands would allow. The second guitar came very quietly, like a shadow too small for its owner. It stayed behind me, it stayed polite. The water took the sound whole. When I ended, the second guitar ended with me. I looked at Leia like we'd pulled off some trick. She smiled back, and I realized we were congratulating ourselves on teaching a river to keep our ghost. I still don't go back to the unmarked patch. I don't look for the pale listener because I don't need to. Some mornings when I wake, there is a coin on my windowsill, old soft face rubbed down to a rumor. Sometimes my case is heavier than it should be, and when I open it, there's dirt in the lining wet enough to stain my fingers with the smell of rain on iron. At night, if I try to play that song alone in my room, the second guitar will come in after a bar like we agreed long ago to always give each other space. I put my best recording of the duet online once as a test under a name that isn't mine. It got a few plays. The comments were the usual mix. Someone accusing me of overdubs. Someone saying they cried at the second phrase because it reminded them of their grandfather's hands. There was one message in my inbox the next morning from an address with numbers like a locker combination. No subject line. Inside a single sentence, "Please follow." No punctuation. No language you can place. Just the little hunger between the two words. I took the file down. Maybe you'll say I'm superstitious. Maybe you'll say I'm ungrateful. People have given me money from under the ground for making shapes in the air. But the thing about duets is that you owe the other player respect. You give them space. You don't make them chase you. You pay them inattention if you have no coins left that the banks will accept. Some evenings I still pass the cemetery on my way to somewhere more ordinary. The gate is closed, but the crows don't care about locks, and neither do the names written in stone. If I stop, even for a second, I'll hear something I can't unhear. Sometimes it's only the wind moving through a chain that was rusted on purpose. Sometimes it's the quiet of a city that has crouched to tie its shoe. And sometimes, if I'm honest, from beneath the pavement, from beneath the rooms, beneath the river and the bridges and the brief people we are, I hear a guitar find my note and follow. A breath late, always polite, never clapping, just leaning closer at every minor chord.